Clara Whitmore's father sold her like livestock to pay his gambling debts, forcing her to marry a silent mountain rancher everyone in Montana feared. She expected cruelty. She expected violence. But what she discovered on Black Hollow Ridge was far more terrifying than any brutality. A man who had been preparing for her arrival for 15 years. A man who had built an entire life around a single moment of childhood kindness she didn't even remember giving. This is a story about the woman who learned that sometimes the most dangerous thing a person can do is let themselves be loved. If you want to see how this story ends, stay until the final word, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from, so I can see how far Clara's story has traveled across the world. The church in Dust Creek didn't have proper windows anymore. Someone had boarded them up 3 winters back when the glass shattered during a hailstorm, and nobody had bothered replacing them since. So the interior sat in permanent gray dimness, lit only by whatever sunlight managed to slip through the gaps between warped planks and the 2 oil lamps somebody remembered to fill that morning. Clara Whitmore stood at the back of that church in her dead mother's wedding dress, the one she'd patched 17 times over the years, the one with lace so old it had gone the color of old teeth, and tried very hard not to vomit on the floorboards. 24 years old, unmarried, living under her father's roof like some kind of parasite nobody wanted but couldn't quite get rid of. That's what Vernon Whitmore told her every single day, anyway. Usually while he was 3 drinks deep and looking for someone to blame for the fact that his life had turned into exactly the disaster he deserved. The town had gathered for the show. That's what this was, really. Entertainment. Clara could see it in their faces. The women whispering behind their hands, the men shifting their weight and trying not to smile. Everyone waiting to see what would happen when Dust Creek's most notorious drunk finally managed to pawn off his worthless daughter to some desperate fool willing to take her. Except the fool wasn't desperate. He was terrifying. Gideon Vale stood near the front of the church like a piece of mountain that had learned to walk. 6 feet and then some, shoulders built from years of splitting wood and wrestling cattle, hands scarred and calloused and completely still at his sides. He didn't fidget, didn't look around nervously, didn't do any of the things normal grooms did while waiting for their brides. He just stood there, silent. Clara had seen him exactly 3 times before today. Once, 2 months ago, when he'd ridden into town on a horse that looked half wild and bought supplies at the general store without speaking to anyone. The shopkeeper's wife had whispered that he lived up on Black Hollow Ridge, miles into the mountain wilderness, running cattle on land so brutal that most men wouldn't last a single winter. The second time, he'd been outside the saloon when Clara's father stumbled out mid-afternoon, already drunk, already loud. Gideon had watched Vernon Whitmore fall face first into the street mud and hadn't offered to help him up, just watched, then rode away. The third time was a week ago, when he'd appeared at their falling-apart house on the edge of town and asked Vernon for Clara's hand in marriage. Not asked Clara, asked Vernon, like she was a piece of furniture someone wanted to buy. Her father had laughed so hard he'd nearly choked. Then Gideon had placed a stack of money on the table, more money than Clara had seen in her entire life, and Vernon's laughter had died in his throat like a snake someone stepped on. "You're serious," Vernon had said. "I am. You know she's not... she's got no dowry. No skills worth mentioning. She's plain as dirt and twice as dull. Why the hell would you want..." "I'll ask one more time," Gideon had said quietly. "Then I'm leaving." Vernon had looked at the money, then at Clara, who'd been standing in the kitchen doorway trying to understand what was happening, then back at the money. "When?" Vernon had asked. 2 weeks. I'll make arrangements with the church." And that had been it. No courtship, no conversation, no questions about what Clara wanted or didn't want, because women like her didn't get to want things. Women like her took what they were given and kept their mouths shut and tried not to think too hard about how their lives had turned into something they didn't recognize anymore. Now here she stood, wearing a dress that smelled like the cedar chest it had been buried in for 6 years, waiting to marry a man she didn't know. A man everyone feared. The Reverend cleared his throat. He was 70 if he was a day, half blind, and deeply uncomfortable with the whole situation. Clara didn't blame him. This didn't feel like a wedding. It felt like a business transaction taking place in a building that used to mean something holy. "We are gathered here today," the Reverend began, his voice shaking slightly, "to join this man and this woman in Get on with it, Vernon called from the front pew. He was already drunk. Of course he was already drunk. Ain't nobody here for the poetry. Someone in the back laughed. Clara's hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together to make it stop. She focused on breathing. In, out, in, out. Don't cry. Don't give them that satisfaction. Don't let them see how scared you are. Gideon turned to look at her for the first time since she'd entered the church. His eyes were dark. Not brown. Something deeper than that. The kind of dark that looked black in certain light. He studied her face for a long moment, and Clara felt something cold slide down her spine because she couldn't read his expression at all. No anger, no satisfaction, no cruelty. Nothing. Just that steady, unblinking stare. "Do you, Gideon Vale," the Reverend said, stumbling slightly over the words, "take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" "I do." 2 words, flat, final. The Reverend turned to Clara, and she could see pity in his old eyes. Poor girl, he was thinking. Poor stupid girl, marrying a man like that. Going up into those mountains where nobody will hear her scream. "Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband, to have and to hold, for better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do you part?" Her throat had closed up completely. She couldn't speak, couldn't move. "Clara," the Reverend said gently, "do you consent to this marriage?" Consent. What a strange word. Like she had a choice. Like she could say no, walk out of this church, go back to her father's house, and continue existing in that half-life where every day was exactly the same kind of miserable. She thought about her mother's grave on the hill outside town, the wooden marker her father never bothered to replace when it rotted, the way grass had grown over it until you couldn't tell where her mother ended and the earth began. At least this was different. At least this was movement, even if the direction was straight off a cliff. "I do," Clara whispered. "Louder," someone shouted from the back. "I do," she said again, and this time her voice didn't shake. "Then by the power vested in me," the Reverend said quickly, like he wanted this over with as much as everyone else, "I now pronounce you man and wife. You may kiss the bride." Gideon looked at her again. Then he held out his hand, not reaching for her, just extending it, offering. Clara stared at that hand, calloused, scarred across the knuckles, absolutely massive compared to her own. She placed her hand in his fingers closed around hers, careful, and then he was leading her down the aisle, past the gawking townspeople, past her father who was already arguing with someone about money, past the Reverend who looked relieved it was over. Out into the cold Montana morning where a wagon waited. Gideon's wagon, loaded with supplies, pulled by 2 horses that stamped and snorted in the freezing air. "Get in," he said. Not cruel, not kind, just instructional. Clara climbed onto the wagon seat, her mother's dress catching on the rough wood. She heard it tear slightly and didn't care. It didn't matter anymore. Nothing about the person she'd been an hour ago mattered anymore. Gideon climbed up beside her, took the reins, and clicked his tongue at the horses. The wagon lurched forward, and Dust Creek began to fall away behind them. Aught. They rode in silence for the first hour. The town disappeared quickly once they hit the mountain road. Not a real road, just a trail that had been worn into the earth by enough wagons over enough years that it counted as passage. Pine trees closed in on both sides, tall and dark, and dense enough to block out most of the sky. Clara kept her hands folded in her lap and tried not to think about what happened to women who married men they didn't know. She'd heard stories. Everyone had heard stories. Women who went into the mountains and were never seen again. Women who came back to town years later with dead eyes and broken teeth, and children who looked at the ground when anyone spoke. She glanced at Gideon from the corner of her eye. He was focused on the road, guiding the horses around ruts and fallen branches with the ease of someone who'd made this journey 1,000 times. His jaw was set, shadowed with dark stubble. His hands on the reins were steady. He hadn't tried to touch her yet. That was something. Clara had expected. She didn't know what she'd expected. Maybe that he'd try to kiss her the moment they were alone. Maybe that he'd push her down in the wagon bed and remind her exactly what she was now. Property. His property. But he just drove. The temperature dropped as they climbed higher into the mountains. Clara's dress, thin cotton and lace meant for indoor ceremonies, not wilderness travel, did absolutely nothing against the cold. She wrapped her arms around herself and tried not to shiver too obviously. Gideon noticed anyway. He didn't say anything, just reached behind the wagon seat, pulled out a heavy canvas coat, and set it down beside her. Clara stared at it. "Put it on," Gideon said. First words he'd spoken since they'd left town. "I'm fine." "You're freezing." "I said I'm fine." He gave her a look, just a quick glance, barely a second, and then turned back to the road. But the coat stayed where it was, offered. Pride was a stupid thing to cling to when your teeth were starting to chatter. Clara knew that. And yet some part of her, some stubborn, broken part, didn't want to take anything from this man, didn't want to owe him, didn't want to start the long slide into gratitude that would make it easier when he finally showed his true nature. Another 10 minutes passed. The cold got worse. Clara's hands were going numb. "Suit yourself," Gideon said quietly. "Freeze if you want." He didn't sound angry. Didn't sound like he cared one way or the other. That was somehow worse than if he'd been mean about it. Clara grabbed the coat and pulled it on. It was enormous on her. The sleeves hung past her hands, the hem fell to her knees, and it smelled like wood smoke and pine and something else she couldn't identify. Something that made her think of winter mornings and snowfall and things that had nothing to do with fear. The warmth was immediate, almost shocking. She pulled the coat tighter around herself and hated that it felt good, hated that this small kindness made her want to cry. "Thank you," she said, because her mother had raised her with manners even if everything else had fallen apart. Gideon nodded once, didn't look at her. They kept climbing. The sun was starting to set when Black Hollow Ridge finally came into view. Clara had been half asleep, lulled by the rhythm of the wagon and the exhaustion of the day when Gideon said, "There!" She looked up. The ridge stretched out before them, a long, high plateau carved into the mountainside, surrounded by forest on 3 sides and open to a valley view on the 4th. And there, sitting in a cleared area near the center, was a house, not a cabin. A house, 2 stories, built from solid timber, with a stone chimney rising from one end and a wide porch wrapping around the front. There was a barn set back behind it, and several smaller outbuildings, and fenced pastures where Clara could see cattle moving in the dimming light. This was Black Hollow Ridge. This was where Gideon Vale lived. It looked permanent, established, like someone had built it to last centuries, not years. "Did you build all this yourself?" Clara asked before she could stop herself. "Most of it." "How long have you been here?" 10 years, give or take. 10 years. Building this place. Alone. In the mountains where winter could kill a person just for standing still too long. The wagon rolled up to the house, and Gideon brought the horses to a stop. He climbed down, then turned and held out his hand again. Clara looked at that hand. Took it. Let him help her down. The moment her feet touched solid ground, her legs nearly gave out. Hours of sitting in the cold had turned her muscles to wood. She stumbled, and Gideon's other hand came up to steady her, gripping her elbow, firm but not painful. "You all right?" he asked. "Yes, just stiff." He released her immediately and stepped back, putting distance between them. Clara stood there in his massive coat, in her ruined wedding dress, and looked at the house that was apparently hers now. "I'll show you inside," Gideon said. "Then I need to tend the horses." He led her up the porch steps, solid wood, no creaking, well built, and opened the front door. The interior was warm. That was the first thing Clara noticed. Actually warm. There was a fire burning in the main room's fireplace, casting orange light across furniture that looked handmade but carefully crafted. A table, chairs, a rocking chair near the hearth, shelves along one wall holding books and tools and various supplies. The floor was wood, sanded smooth, covered here and there with woven rugs. Everything was clean. Not just clean, cared for. Clara walked slowly into the room, touching nothing, trying to understand what she was seeing. This wasn't what mountain men lived in. This was what families lived in. This was what people built when they planned to stay. "Kitchen's through there," Gideon said, pointing to a doorway. "Bedroom upstairs. He paused. "There's a room for you, if you want it, or you can take the main bedroom. Up to you." Clara turned to look at him. What do you mean, up to me? I mean, it's up to you. Where will you sleep? Wherever you're not. She must have looked confused because he continued, voice flat and matter of fact. I'm not going to force anything. You can have your own space, your own room. I won't touch you unless you ask me to. Clara's heart was beating very fast. Then why did you marry me? Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Something moved behind his eyes. Something that might have been emotion if the light had been better, and if Clara had known what to look for. That's a long conversation, he said finally, and you're exhausted. Get some rest. We'll talk tomorrow. Then he turned and walked back outside, closing the door quietly behind him. Clara stood alone in the warm house, in a dead woman's dress and a stranger's coat, and tried very hard to understand what kind of trap she'd just walked into, because this couldn't be real. Kindness was never real, not for women like her. There had to be a catch. There was always a catch. She found the bedroom by climbing the narrow staircase at the back of the main room. There were 2 doors at the top. One was closed. The other stood slightly open. Clara pushed it wider and stepped inside. The room was small but not cramped. A bed, real bed frame, real mattress, quilts piled thick, sat against one wall beneath a window. There was a dresser. A small table with a basin and pitcher. A hook on the wall for hanging clothes. And on the pillow, folded carefully, was a ribbon. Clara walked over to the bed and picked it up. Blue silk, faded slightly with age, but still soft. The kind of ribbon a woman might wear in her hair for something special. She didn't understand. None of this made sense. She set the ribbon down and went to the window. Outside, she could see Gideon leading the horses toward the barn, moving with the easy confidence of someone who knew every inch of this land. He disappeared inside the barn, and lamplight flickered to life through the gaps in the walls. Clara turned away from the window and sat down on the edge of the bed. The mattress was firm, comfortable. The quilts smelled clean. Her father's house had smelled like whiskey and rot. Her room there had been barely large enough for a cot and had flooded every time it rained hard. She'd slept in damp blankets more nights than she could count, listening to her father stumble around downstairs, waiting for him to either pass out or come upstairs looking for something to break. This room was warm, dry, safe. Clara put her face in her hands and tried not to cry. She failed. Bang! She must have fallen asleep because the next thing she knew, it was full dark outside and someone was knocking softly on the door. Clara? Gideon's voice. Quiet. You awake? She sat up quickly, disoriented, still wearing the wedding dress and the coat. Yes. There's food downstairs if you're hungry. No pressure. Footsteps retreating. He didn't wait for an answer. Clara's stomach was growling. She couldn't remember the last time she'd eaten. Maybe yesterday? The morning before the wedding had been such a blur of panic and dread that food hadn't even occurred to her. She stood, smoothed down the dress as much as possible, and went downstairs. Gideon was sitting at the table, eating what looked like stew from a wooden bowl. There was a second bowl waiting at the other end of the table, steam still rising from it. He glanced up when she appeared but didn't say anything, just gestured at the bowl with his spoon. Clara sat down and picked up her own spoon. The stew was simple. Meat, potatoes, carrots, some kind of herb she didn't recognize. But it was hot and filling and tasted better than anything she'd eaten in months. They ate in silence. It should have been awkward, should have been unbearable. But somehow it wasn't. When Clara's bowl was empty, Gideon stood and took it without asking, bringing it to the kitchen along with his own. She heard water running, the sound of washing. He was doing dishes. Clara sat at the table, hands folded in her lap, and tried to reconcile everything she'd expected with everything that was actually happening. Gideon came back and sat down again, this time in the chair closer to hers instead of at the opposite end. Not touching close, but near enough that she could see his face clearly in the firelight. I know this is strange, he said. Clara almost laughed. That's one word for it. You probably have questions. Hundreds. I'll answer what I can. She looked at him, really looked at him for the first time since the church. His face was hard, carved by weather and work, but not mean, not cruel, just lived in, like someone who'd spent a lot of time alone and had learned to carry it. Why did you marry me? Clara asked. The same question from earlier, but this time he couldn't walk away. Gideon was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. Then, because I've been planning to for 15 years. Clara's breath caught. What? I knew your father wouldn't let you go unless someone paid him, so I saved, worked, built this place. And when I had enough, I made my offer. But you don't even know me. I know you better than you think. That sent ice down her spine. What does that mean? Gideon looked up, and there was something in his eyes that Clara couldn't name. Something that looked almost like pain. I'll tell you, he said quietly. But not tonight. You're exhausted. And I don't want you hearing this when you're too tired to understand it properly. That's not fair. I know. I have a right to know why. You do, Gideon interrupted gently. And I'll tell you, tomorrow. I promise. But tonight, just rest, please. Clara wanted to argue, wanted to demand answers right now, this second, because waiting felt dangerous and the not knowing felt like standing on the edge of a cliff in the dark. But she was tired. So tired. All right, she said finally. Tomorrow. Gideon nodded. Tomorrow. He stood, walked to the door, and grabbed a heavy coat from a hook on the wall. Where are you going? Clara asked. Barn. I'll sleep out there tonight. You don't have to, I know, but I will anyway. You should have the house to yourself. Get comfortable. There's more food in the kitchen if you get hungry again, and water in the pump outside if you need it. Anything else? He paused. Just try to rest. Then he was gone, door closing quietly behind him, leaving Clara alone in the warm house that made no sense. She sat there for a long time, staring at the fire, trying to understand, trying not to hope, because hope was dangerous. Hope got you hurt. That's it. The next morning, Clara woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. She lay there for a moment, disoriented, before remembering Black Hollow Ridge, the wedding, Gideon, her husband. She got out of bed, still wearing the wedding dress because she had literally nothing else, and went downstairs. Gideon was at the stove, cooking something in a cast-iron pan. He looked up when she appeared, and if he thought it was strange that she was wearing the same clothes as yesterday, he didn't mention it. Morning, he said. Morning. Coffee's ready. Eggs in a minute. Clara poured herself coffee from the pot on the stove, and it was strong and bitter and perfect. She sat at the table and watched Gideon cook. He moved efficiently. No wasted motion. He'd done this 1,000 times. Do you always wake up this early? Clara asked. Animals don't care if it's Sunday. Is it Sunday? Wednesday. She'd lost track of days completely. Everything before the wagon ride felt like it had happened years ago instead of yesterday. Gideon slid a plate of eggs in front of her, scrambled, cooked with butter, salt, some green herb that tasted sharp and good. His own plate followed, and he sat down across from her. They ate. I need to check the fence line today, Gideon said after a while. North pasture. Might be gone most of the morning. All right. You can do whatever you want while I'm gone. Explore, rest, whatever. He paused, choosing words carefully. Just don't wander too far into the woods. Easy to get turned around if you don't know the trails. I won't. He nodded, finished his eggs, and stood. But before he could leave, Clara said, You promised. You said you'd tell me why you married me. Gideon stopped, turned back. I did promise that, he said quietly. So tell me. He looked at her for a long moment, and Clara saw something flicker across his face. Uncertainty, maybe, or fear, which seemed impossible for a man like him. Tonight, he said finally. When I get back. I'll tell you everything. That a deal? It wasn't. She wanted answers now, but she could see he meant it, and pushing didn't feel like it would help. Tonight, Clara agreed. Gideon nodded once, grabbed his coat, and left. Clara sat alone in the kitchen, listening to his footsteps fade toward the barn, and wondered what secret could possibly be worth 15 years of waiting. Sick. She spent the morning exploring the house. It was bigger than she'd realized. The main room with the fireplace. A kitchen that was actually separate, with a proper wood-burning stove and shelves stocked with supplies. Flour, sugar, salt, dried meat, preserved vegetables in jars, a pantry, a root cellar accessed through a trapdoor in the kitchen floor. Upstairs, the two bedrooms, the one she'd slept in and the other. Clara stood outside the closed door for a long time before finally opening it. This room was larger. Clearly Gideon's. The bed was bigger, made neatly, covered with different quilts. There was a desk beneath the window, scattered with papers and what looked like ledgers. A rifle mounted on the wall, clothes hanging from pegs. And on the desk, half hidden beneath some papers, Clara saw the edge of something carved from wood. She walked over and moved the papers aside. It was a small wooden box, about the size of her hand, intricately carved with a pattern of leaves and vines. Beautiful work. Careful work. Clara picked it up and opened it. Inside, wrapped in soft cloth, was a tiny carved wooden hawk. Her breath stopped. She lifted the hawk out carefully and held it up to the light. It was old. The wood had darkened with age and handling, but the craftsmanship was extraordinary. Every feather carved in delicate detail, wings spread mid-flight, even the tiny talons visible. Clara knew this hawk. She knew it because she'd made it. Not made, carved. Years and years ago, when she was maybe 9 or 10 years old, back when her mother was still alive and teaching her how to work with wood. Clara had spent weeks on this little hawk, whittling away at it with her mother's smallest knife, trying to make something beautiful. When she'd finally finished it, she'd been so proud, had carried it everywhere, kept it in her pocket like a talisman. And then one day, behind her father's barn, she'd dropped it in the mud and couldn't find it again, no matter how hard she'd looked. She'd cried for hours. That had been 15 years ago. Clara stood in Gideon Vale's bedroom, holding a wooden hawk that should not exist, and felt the entire world tilt sideways. When Gideon came back that afternoon, Clara was waiting for him at the table with the hawk sitting between them. He saw it the moment he walked in, froze in the doorway, then closed the door quietly behind him and took off his coat without saying anything. "Where did you get this?" Clara asked. Her voice sounded strange, too calm. Gideon sat down across from her, looked at the hawk, then at her. "You dropped it," he said quietly, 15 years ago, behind your father's barn. "How do you know that?" "Because I was there." Clara's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the table. "Why were you at my father's barn 15 years ago?" Gideon was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because I was starving, and you'd left me bread there the day before." The world went completely still. "What?" Clara whispered. "I was an orphan," Gideon said, still in that same quiet, careful voice. "Lived on the street in Dust Creek, did odd jobs for scraps, that's sweeping, hauling, whatever people would pay a kid to do. Your mother saw me one day, digging through garbage behind the butcher's shop. She gave me work, paid me in food, told me to come to your barn every few days, and she'd leave something for me." Clara couldn't breathe. "She did that for months," Gideon continued, "and sometimes you'd be there. You were just a kid yourself, but you'd sit on the fence and talk to me while I ate, asked me questions, told me stories. You never looked at me like I was dirt, never treated me like I was something disgusting." He reached out and touched the hawk with one finger, gentle. "This day you were working on this. Showed it to me. I said it was beautiful. You smiled like that was the best thing anyone had ever told you. Then you dropped it running back to the house, and I found it in the mud after you left." "Why didn't you give it back?" Clara asked. Her voice cracked. "I tried. Came back the next day, but your mother was—" He swallowed hard. "She was already sick, I could see it, and 2 weeks later she was dead, and you stopped coming to the barn." Clara's eyes were burning. "I forgot," she whispered. "I forgot all of it." "I know. I forgot you." "I know," Gideon said again, and this time there was something raw in his voice. "But I never forgot you." Clara looked at him, this massive, quiet man who'd built an entire life in the wilderness, and suddenly understood. "You did all this for me," she said. "The house. Everything. I told you I'd been planning this for 15 years. But I didn't even remember." "Didn't matter." Gideon's voice was firm now, certain. "You were kind to me when nobody else was. You looked at me like I was a person. And when your father started drinking himself to death and dragging you down with him, I knew nobody else would save you unless I did. So you built Black Hollow Ridge." "I built a home," Gideon corrected quietly. For the girl who gave bread to a starving kid. For the only person who ever made me feel human. Clara couldn't stop the tears. They came hot and fast, and she put her face in her hands because she didn't want him to see. But Gideon just sat there, quiet and steady, waiting. When she finally looked up again, he was watching her with those dark, careful eyes. "I don't deserve this," Clara said. "Yes, you do. You don't even know me anymore." "Then we'll learn," Gideon said simply. "No rush. No expectations. We've got time." Clara picked up the wooden hawk and turned it over in her hands. This tiny thing she'd made as a child. This tiny thing he'd kept for 15 years. "I'm scared," she admitted. "Of me?" "Of all of it." Gideon nodded slowly. "That's fair. But I meant what I said yesterday. I won't force anything. You want separate rooms forever, that's fine. You want to leave? I won't stop you. I don't want to leave," Clara interrupted. He stopped, looked at her. "I don't want to leave," she said again, stronger this time. "I just need time to understand, to figure out who I am when I'm not..." She gestured helplessly. "When I'm not just surviving." "Take all the time you need," Gideon said. And Clara believed him. For the first time in her life, someone had said something kind, and she actually believed it was real. Atik. The days began to settle into a rhythm after that. Gideon worked. Clara explored. They shared meals, talked when they felt like it, stayed quiet when they didn't. He slept in the barn. She kept the house. It wasn't romance. It wasn't even really a marriage in any traditional sense, but it was peaceful. And peace was something Clara had never experienced before. She started taking care of things, cooking better meals, organizing the pantry, mending clothes that needed it. Not because Gideon expected it, but because it felt good to have purpose beyond simple survival. One afternoon, she found an old trunk in the corner of the main room and opened it. Inside were supplies. Women's supplies. Fabric. Thread. A sewing kit. Several dresses. Simple, practical, the right size. Clara held up one of the dresses. Dark blue wool. Well made. Almost new. "I guessed at the size," Gideon said from behind her. She turned. He was standing in the doorway, still in his work clothes, looking uncertain. "When did you get these?" Clara asked. "Few weeks before the wedding. Thought you might need... I figured you wouldn't have much." Clara looked back at the trunk, at the dresses and fabric and supplies that represented thought and planning and care. "Thank you," she said. "You don't have to thank me for basic necessities." "Yes, I do." Gideon shifted his weight, uncomfortable with gratitude. "Well, they're yours now. Do whatever you want with them." He left before she could say anything else. Clara stood there for a long time, holding the blue dress, and felt something crack open in her chest. Winter came to Black Hollow Ridge like a hammer. One day it was just cold. The next day it was a blizzard that buried the world in white. Gideon had prepared. The barn was stocked with hay, the pantry full, firewood stacked high against the house. He'd spent the better part of a week before the snow hit, making sure everything was secured, reinforced, ready. But even with preparation, the storm was brutal. It started mid-morning and didn't stop for 3 days. Clara had never seen snow like this. It piled up against the windows, blocked the door, turned the entire ridge into something unrecognizable. The wind screamed, the house shook, and the animals still needed tending. "I have to check the barn," Gideon said on the second day, pulling on every layer of clothing he owned. "You can't go out in this," Clara said. "You'll freeze to death before you make it 10 feet. Cattle need water. Horses need hay. I don't have a choice." He was right. Clara knew he was right. But the idea of him walking out into that white hell made her stomach turn. "Then I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not. You can't do it alone. I've done it plenty of times." "Not with me here, you haven't." They stared at each other, Clara in her wool dress and shawl, Gideon already bundled like he was heading into battle. "No," Gideon said firmly. "I'm your wife," Clara shot back. "That's what you told my father, right? Well, wives help. That's how this works." "Clara, give me a coat and tell me what to carry." For a moment she thought he'd refuse, thought he'd physically bar the door to keep her inside, but then he grabbed the canvas coat from the hook, the same one he'd given her that first wagon ride, and held it out. "Stay close," he said. "Don't let go of my hand. We get separated in this, you won't find your way back." Clara put on the coat and took his hand. They went out into the storm together. It was like stepping into a roaring white nothing. Clara couldn't see 3 feet in front of her face. The wind tried to rip her away immediately, and only Gideon's grip kept her grounded. They moved slowly, Gideon leading, Clara following, both of them bent against the wind. The barn was maybe 50 yards from the house. It felt like 50 miles. But they made it. Inside, the animals were restless but alive. Clara held the lantern while Gideon distributed hay and broke ice from the water trough. Her hands were numb within minutes. Her face felt like it was being cut by frozen knives. But they did the work. And when it was done, they made the journey back to the house. Clara's legs gave out the moment they were inside. Just collapsed. Gideon caught her before she hit the floor, and she found herself sitting on the rug in front of the fireplace while he pulled off her frozen boots and wrapped blankets around her shoulders. "You're insane," he muttered, rubbing warmth back into her hands. "Completely insane." "Takes one to know one," Clara said through chattering teeth. He looked up at her, and for the first time since she'd met him, Gideon smiled. Actually smiled. It transformed his entire face, made him look younger, almost gentle. "Fair point," he said. And Clara, frozen and exhausted and more alive than she'd felt in years, smiled back. Malt. On the third day, the storm finally broke. Clara woke to silence. Real silence, not the screaming wind, and sunlight coming through the window. She went downstairs and found Gideon already up, staring out at the transformed ridge. Everything was white, buried. The world had been completely remade. "We're going to be snowed in for weeks," Gideon said. "Maybe longer." "Is that a problem?" He glanced at her. "You tell me. Can you handle being stuck here with me that long?" Clara walked over to stand beside him at the window. Outside, the snow sparkled in the morning light. Beautiful. Deadly. Isolating. "Yes," she said simply. And she meant it. Because somewhere between the wagon ride and the blizzard, between the wooden hawk and the storm, Clara had stopped being afraid of Black Hollow Ridge, had stopped being afraid of Gideon, had started, slowly, carefully, to believe that maybe this strange marriage could become something real. The weeks that followed the blizzard passed in a strange kind of suspended reality. Snow kept them locked on the ridge like prisoners who'd forgotten they were supposed to want to escape. Clara stopped counting days. They all blurred together into a rhythm of morning fires and evening meals, of Gideon disappearing into the cold to tend animals, and Clara learning every corner of the house that was somehow hers now. She found herself doing things she'd never done before, not because anyone asked, but because the silence of the house demanded filling. One morning, she pulled out the flour and started making bread. Real bread, the way her mother had taught her before everything fell apart. Her hands remembered the motions even though her mind had tried to forget, kneading, folding, waiting for the rise. The smell filled the house, warm and yeasty and alive. Gideon came in from the barn, stopped dead in the doorway, and just stared. "What?" Clara asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing, just..." He shook snow from his coat. "Smells good." "It's just bread. Hasn't smelled like this in here for 10 years. He said it matter of fact, but Clara heard what he didn't say. 10 years alone. 10 years of functional meals and empty rooms and no one to make bread rise just because it was nice to have. She pulled the loaf from the oven and set it on the table to cool. Gideon washed his hands at the pump, sat down without being asked, and waited. Clara cut 2 thick slices, still steaming, and passed one across. He ate it slowly, carefully, like he was trying to make it last. "Good?" Clara asked. "Best thing I've had in years." It was just bread, but the way he said it made it sound like something else entirely. They sat there in this warm kitchen while snow fell outside, eating bread that tasted like a life Clara had thought was gone forever, and she realized something unsettling. She was starting to feel comfortable here. Not safe. Not yet. Safety was still a foreign concept, but comfortable. And that scared her almost as much as the alternative. That night, Clara lay in her bed upstairs and stared at the ceiling. The house was quiet except for the wind and the occasional crack of settling wood. Gideon was in the barn again. He always slept in the barn, even when the temperature dropped so low that Clara worried he'd freeze. She'd stopped suggesting he take the other bedroom. He always refused anyway. The wooden hawk sat on her nightstand where she'd placed it that first night. She'd taken to holding it sometimes before sleep, running her fingers over the carved feathers, trying to remember the girl who'd made it, trying to remember the boy who'd kept it. The memories were there, but distant, fractured, like looking at something through ice. She remembered her mother's hands showing her how to angle the knife, remembered the barn, the smell of hay, and horses. Remembered someone small and thin sitting on the fence rail eating bread with the desperate focus of someone who didn't know when the next meal would come. Had that really been Gideon? That skinny, hollow-eyed kid who'd looked at her like she was the only good thing in his entire world? Clara rolled onto her side and pulled the quilts tighter. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window in its frame. She wondered if Gideon was cold out there, wondered if he ever regretted bringing her here, wondered what he thought about during those long nights alone in the barn while she slept in the warm house he'd built. Sleep took a long time coming. The next morning, Clara woke to voices downstairs. She sat up, instantly alert. Gideon never had visitors. The ridge was too remote, too difficult to reach, especially in winter. But there were definitely voices, male, unfamiliar. Clara grabbed her shawl and crept to the top of the stairs. "Said you got yourself a wife," someone was saying. Rough voice, amused. "Didn't believe it till I saw the smoke coming from both chimneys. News travels fast." That was Gideon, flat and unwelcoming. "Come on, Vale, let us in. It's colder than a witch's heart out here." A pause, then footsteps, and the door opening. Clara moved down a few steps, just enough to see into the main room. 3 men stood just inside the doorway, stamping snow from their boots. Trappers, by the look of them. Rough clothes, heavy furs, the kind of weathered faces that came from years in the wilderness. One was tall and lean with a scar across his cheek. Another was shorter, broad-shouldered, with a dark beard going gray. The third was younger, maybe Clara's age, with pale eyes that moved around the room like he was cataloging everything worth stealing. "Didn't expect company," Gideon said. "Not quite hostile, but close." "We were passing through, checking trap lines," the scarred one said. "Figured we'd stop by, see if you needed anything. Hell of a storm we just had." "I'm fine." "Sure you are. But what about the new missus?" The scarred man grinned. "Where you hiding her?" Clara's stomach tightened. She could stay upstairs, should stay upstairs. Let Gideon handle this. But something stubborn in her refused to hide. She came down the rest of the stairs. All 3 men turned to look at her, and Clara felt their eyes like hands. Assessing, judging, calculating. "Well, hell," the scarred man said slowly. "Vale, you didn't mention she was pretty." "Didn't mention her at all," Gideon said, and there was an edge in his voice now, sharp, warning. Clara moved to stand beside Gideon, and his hand came up immediately. Not touching her, just present. A barrier. "Clara, these are the Murphy brothers," Gideon said, voice carefully neutral. "They run trap lines through this territory. Murphy brothers, my wife." "Pleasure," the scarred one, apparently the eldest Murphy, said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Name's Jack. This here's Thomas, and the pup's Daniel." Clara nodded but didn't speak. Her mother had taught her that sometimes silence was the safest response. "We won't keep you long," Jack continued, still looking at Clara like she was something interesting he'd found in the woods. "Just wanted to make sure you folks had everything you needed. Winter's been rough." "We're supplied," Gideon said. "Good, good. Though if you need anything, meat, pelts, supplies, you know where to find us." "I know." An awkward silence fell. The younger Murphy, Daniel, was still staring at Clara, not even trying to hide it. "You came from Dusk Creek, didn't you?" Daniel asked suddenly. Clara's spine went rigid. "Yes. Thought I recognized you, saw you there once or twice. You're Vernon Whitmore's girl." The way he said it, Vernon Whitmore's girl, made Clara's skin crawl. "Was," Gideon corrected quietly. "She's my wife now." Right, right," Daniel grinned. "Lucky man, Vale. Real lucky." "Time for you to leave," Gideon said. Not loud, not angry, just absolute. Jack's smile faded. "Now hold on. You checked on us. We're fine." Now you can go. The temperature in the room dropped about 20 degrees. Thomas, the bearded middle brother, put a hand on Jack's arm. A warning. All right, Jack said slowly. No offense meant. We'll get out of your hair. They moved toward the door, but Daniel lingered, looking back at Clara one more time. You ever need anything, ma'am, he said. Anything at all. You just come find us. We're camped about 5 miles north this season. She won't, Gideon said flatly. Daniel's grin widened. Never know. Then they were gone, door closing behind them, the sound of their boots crunching through snow fading away. Gideon stood completely still, staring at the closed door. His jaw was clenched so tight Clara could see the muscle jumping. Who were they really? Clara asked quietly. Trouble? I got that part. Gideon turned to look at her. The Murphy brothers trap, yeah, but they also rob, steal, and worse when they think they can get away with it. Law doesn't reach out this far. Men like that know it. Why did you let them in? Because turning them away would have made things worse. Better to let them see we've got nothing worth taking and move on. Clara's hands were shaking. She clasped them together. The young one. I know. The way he looked at me. I know, Gideon said again, and this time his voice had gone dangerous. They won't come back. I'll make sure of it. How? However I need to. He moved to the window, watching the 3 figures disappear into the tree line. His whole body was tense, coiled, ready for violence. Clara had never seen him like this before, had never seen anything but careful gentleness from him. This was different. This was the man everyone in Montana feared. Gideon, Clara said softly. He didn't turn. Yeah? Thank you for... Don't thank me for basic decency. It wasn't just decency. You were protecting me. Finally, he looked at her. That's what husbands do. Not all of them. Something shifted in his expression, softened slightly. Well, it's what I do. Clara wanted to say more. Wanted to tell him that she'd never had anyone stand between her and danger before. That watching him face down 3 dangerous men without flinching had made something warm unfurl in her chest. But the words wouldn't come, so she just nodded, and Gideon nodded back, and they both understood what hadn't been said. The Murphy brothers didn't come back. Not that week, not the next. But their visit had changed something, made Clara aware of how isolated they were, how vulnerable, how much she was depending on Gideon for safety in a place where safety wasn't guaranteed. She started paying more attention to the rifle mounted on the wall upstairs, started noticing how Gideon always knew where his weapons were, even when he seemed relaxed. One afternoon, while he was checking fence lines, Clara climbed the stairs and took down the rifle. It was heavier than she expected. Cold metal and smooth wood, well-maintained, obviously cared for. She'd never held a gun before. Her father had owned a pistol, but he'd never let her near it. You planning to shoot someone? Clara jumped, nearly dropped the rifle. Gideon was standing in the bedroom doorway, snow still melting on his shoulders. I didn't hear you come in, Clara said. I noticed. He moved into the room, not rushing, just steady. You know how to use that? No. Then you probably shouldn't be holding it. Clara's chin came up. Then teach me. Gideon stopped, looked at her. Why? Because I don't want to be helpless. Because if something happens and you're not here, I need to be able to defend myself. Because... She stopped, searching for the right words. Because I'm tired of being weak. You're not weak. I've been weak my entire life. No, Gideon said firmly. You survived your father for 24 years. That's not weak. That's strong as hell. Clara's throat tightened. I hid. I took it. That's not strength. Sometimes surviving is the only strength there is. They stood there, Clara holding the rifle, Gideon watching her with those dark, careful eyes. You really want to learn? He asked finally. Yes. All right, but not with this one. We'll start with something smaller. He went to the closet and pulled out a smaller rifle, older, lighter, brought it over and showed Clara how to hold it. His hands guided hers, positioning her grip, adjusting her stance. First rule, Gideon said, never point it at anything you're not willing to destroy. Second rule, always assume it's loaded. Third rule, Keep your finger off the trigger until you're ready to fire. Clara nodded, trying to absorb everything. We'll practice outside tomorrow, Gideon continued, shooting at targets, but I need you to promise me something. What? You only use this if you absolutely have to, because once you fire a gun at a person, there's no taking it back, you understand? I understand. He looked at her for a long moment, like he was trying to decide if she really did. Then he took the rifle back and returned it to the closet. Tomorrow, he said, after morning chores. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. You might hate it. But Clara didn't think she would, because for the first time in her life, someone was giving her the tools to protect herself instead of just promising to do it for her. And that felt like freedom. The next day, Gideon set up targets in the clearing behind the barn. Old cans balanced on fence posts, a board with circles drawn in charcoal. Stance first, he said, positioning Clara. Feet apart, weight balanced. Rifle against your shoulder. Tight. It's going to kick. If you're not braced, it'll knock you down. Clara did as he said, feeling awkward and ungainly. Now look down the sight. See that notch at the front? Line it up with your target. She tried. The rifle was heavy. Her arms were already shaking. Breathe, Gideon said quietly. He was standing behind her, close enough that she could feel the warmth of him. In, out. On the exhale, squeeze the trigger. Don't pull. Squeeze. Clara breathed, aimed, squeezed. The rifle roared and kicked back hard into her shoulder. The bullet went wild, didn't hit anything. Again, Gideon said. She tried again, missed again, and again and again. By the 10th shot, Clara's shoulder was screaming and her hands were numb from cold, and she hadn't hit a single target. I'm terrible at this, she said, lowering the rifle. You're learning. There's a difference. I can't hit anything. Not yet. Maybe I'm just not. Try again, Gideon interrupted. One more. Clara wanted to quit, wanted to hand him the rifle and go back inside where it was warm and she didn't have to face her own incompetence. But she raised the rifle instead, braced her feet, settled the stock against her shoulder, looked down the sight, breathed, squeezed. The leftmost can exploded off its post. Clara stared. I hit it. You hit it. I actually hit it. She turned to look at Gideon, grinning like an idiot, and found him smiling back. That rare, transformative smile that made him look like someone who remembered how to be happy. Told you, he said. Clara laughed. Actually laughed. When was the last time she'd done that? When was the last time anything had felt like an accomplishment instead of just another day survived? Again? She asked. Again, Gideon agreed. They stayed out there until the sun started setting and Clara had knocked down 3 more cans. Her shoulder would be bruised tomorrow. Her hands were frozen. She didn't care, because she'd hit something. She'd aimed and fired and hit what she was aiming at, and that felt like power. Walking back to the house, Gideon said casually, You did good today. I missed more than I hit. Everyone does it first. Point is, you didn't quit. Clara glanced at him. Did you think I would? No, but I wouldn't have blamed you if you did. They reached the porch, and Clara stopped. The sun was setting behind the mountains, turning the snow pink and gold. Beautiful and cold and unforgiving. I don't quit things anymore, Clara said quietly. I spent too many years just existing, taking whatever came. I'm done with that. Gideon looked at her, and there was something in his expression Clara couldn't quite name, pride maybe, or respect. Good, he said simply. And Clara realized that she meant it. She was done being the person who'd walked out of Dust Creek wearing a dead woman's dress and shame like a second skin. She was becoming someone else. Someone who could shoot a rifle and bake bread and stand beside a dangerous man without flinching. Someone who was starting to believe she deserved to take up space in the world. The transformation wasn't complete. Probably wouldn't be for a long time. But it had started. And that was enough. Spring came slowly to Black Hollow Ridge. The snow didn't melt so much as reluctantly retreat, inch by inch, revealing mud and dead grass and the skeletal remains of last year's garden. Clara stood at the kitchen window one morning in early March, watching water drip from the icicles hanging off the porch roof, and felt something shift inside her chest. Hope. Actual hope. She'd been on the ridge for 4 months now. 4 months of learning how to live with a man who kept his distance but never made her feel unwanted. 4 months of discovering that kindness didn't always come with conditions attached. 4 months of slowly, carefully letting herself believe this might be real. You planning to plant something this year? Clara turned. Gideon was at the table, repairing a piece of tack, his hands moving with the easy competence of someone who'd done this 1,000 times. I don't know anything about gardening, Clara admitted. Your mother did. My mother knew a lot of things I never learned. Gideon set down the leather strap he'd been working on. I've got seeds, saved them from last year. Could show you how to start them if you want. You garden? Have to. Can't run cattle into town every time I need vegetables. Clara came over and sat down across from him. What do you grow? Potatoes, carrots, onions, beans, things that store well. Some herbs. Tried tomatoes once, but the season's too short up here. He paused. Could expand it, if you wanted. Add more variety. Why would you do that? Because you're here now. Doesn't have to just be survival food anymore. Clara looked at him. This man who'd built a life around the memory of a kind child and had somehow managed to make space for the broken woman she'd become. I'd like that, she said quietly. Learning to grow things. All right then. We'll start seeds inside next week. Get them strong before we transplant. It was such a simple conversation, so domestic, but it made Clara's chest feel too full, like something was trying to burst out. Gideon? He looked up. Why do you still sleep in the barn? The question hung between them. Clara hadn't meant to ask it, but now that she had, she couldn't take it back. Gideon's hands went still on the leather. You want me in the house? I didn't say that. I don't understand why you won't even use the other bedroom. It's cold out there. You built that room for yourself, didn't you? Why won't you use it? He was quiet for a long time. Then, because I don't want you to feel trapped. I don't feel trapped. You might. If I was here all the time, in your space. It's your house, Gideon. It's our house, he corrected gently, but you didn't choose it. Didn't choose me. I'm not going to crowd you just because I can. Clara's throat felt tight. What if I'm saying you're not crowding me? Gideon looked at her then, really looked at her, and Clara saw vulnerability in his eyes. Actual fear. Are you? He asked quietly. Yes. You sure? I'm sure. He studied her face like he was searching for doubt, for any sign that she was just saying what she thought he wanted to hear. Clara held his gaze and didn't look away. Finally, Gideon nodded. All right, I'll use the other bedroom, if that's really what you want. It is. All right, he said again. That night, for the first time since their wedding, Gideon slept in the house. Clara lay in her bed and listened to him moving around in the other room. The creak of floorboards, the sound of boots being set down, the rustle of blankets. It should have felt intrusive, should have made her nervous. Instead, it felt right. Like the house had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. Clara pulled her quilts up and closed her eyes, and for the first time in 4 months, she fell asleep knowing she wasn't alone in the dark. The nightmares came 3 weeks later. Clara woke up gasping, her father's voice still echoing in her head. Worthless, burden, waste of space. Should have drowned you when you were born, saved everyone the trouble. She sat up, shaking, trying to breathe through the panic. It had been so long since she'd dreamed about him. Weeks. She'd started to think maybe she was free of it, but trauma didn't work that way. Trauma waited until you felt safe, and then it reminded you why safety was a lie. Clara got out of bed on shaking legs and went to the window. Outside, the moon was nearly full, turning the ridge silver. Everything was still, peaceful. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried to calm down. A knock on her door made her jump. Clara? Gideon's voice, rough with sleep. You all right? She should say yes, should send him away, should handle this alone the way she always had. No, she whispered instead. The door opened. Gideon stood there in his undershirt and pants, hair mussed, looking concerned. Bad dream? He asked. Clara nodded, not trusting her voice. About your father? Another nod. Gideon stepped into the room but didn't approach, just stood near the door, giving her space. You want to talk about it? No. All right. He turned to leave. Wait, Clara said. He stopped. Could you just stay? Just for a minute. I don't want to be alone right now. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Then he crossed the room and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall, leaving the bed to her. I'm here, he said quietly, as long as you need. Clara climbed back into bed and pulled the quilts around herself. Gideon sat against the wall, not speaking, just present. Slowly her breathing calmed. The shaking stopped. He told me I was worthless, Clara said suddenly. Every day, for years. Told me I was the reason my mother died. That she got sick because I was such a disappointment. Gideon's jaw clenched, but he didn't interrupt. I believed him, Clara continued. I believed every word. And even now, even here, sometimes I wake up and think he was right. That I don't deserve any of this. That you're going to realize what a mistake you made and... Stop, Gideon said, not loud but firm. Just stop. He stood and came to sit on the edge of her bed, careful to keep distance between them. Your father was a drunk and a coward, Gideon said, and everything he told you was a lie. You understand me? Every single word was a lie. You don't know. I know you gave bread to a starving kid when you had barely enough for yourself. I know you survived 24 years in a house that would have broken most people. I know you stood up to 3 dangerous men without flinching. I know you learned to shoot a rifle in freezing cold because you refused to be helpless. He paused. You're not worthless, Clara. You never were. Clara's eyes were burning. How do you know? Because I've been watching you for 15 years, Gideon said quietly, and I've never seen anything in you that wasn't worth keeping. The tears came then, hot and fast. Clara tried to hold them back, but it was useless. Gideon reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took her hand. You're safe here, he said. I promise. He can't hurt you anymore. I know. Do you? Clara looked at their joined hands, his so much larger, scarred and calloused, hers small and pale and shaking. I'm starting to, she whispered. Gideon squeezed her hand gently. Then he stood. I'll be right across the hall. You need anything? Just call. He was halfway to the door when Clara said, Gideon? Yeah? Thank you for everything. He looked back at her, and in the moonlight his expression was unbearably gentle. You don't need to thank me for being your husband, he said. Then he was gone, door closing softly behind him, and Clara lay back down, still crying, but this time from something that felt less like grief and more like relief. The nightmares didn't stop after that night, but they became less frequent, less vicious. Clara still woke up sometimes with her father's voice in her head, but now she could get up, walk to her window, and remind herself where she was, who she'd become. And sometimes, when it was really bad, she'd find Gideon already awake downstairs, sitting by the fire with coffee, like he'd been waiting. He never asked questions, never pushed, just made room for her on the other chair and sat in companionable silence until the shaking stopped. April arrived with mud and rain and the first green shoots pushing through the earth. Clara spent her mornings helping Gideon with the seedlings they'd started in wooden boxes on the windowsills, tiny fragile things that needed constant attention. She learned to recognize which plants were thriving and which needed more water, more light, more space to grow. It felt like a metaphor, though she tried not to think about it too hard. One afternoon, while Gideon was out mending fence, Clara was transplanting seedlings when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses. Her stomach dropped. She went to the window and saw 3 riders coming up the trail. For a moment she thought it was the Murphy brothers again, and her hand automatically went to where Gideon kept the rifle near the door. But these weren't the Murphys. These riders wore better clothes, sat straighter in their saddles. As they got closer, Clara could make out a woman among them. Middle-aged, well-dressed, riding side saddle with the ease of someone who'd been doing it her whole life. Clara's heart started pounding for a different reason now. She didn't know these people, but she recognized what they represented. Civilization, society. The kind of people who had opinions about everything and weren't shy about sharing them. The kind of people who would absolutely have opinions about Gideon Vale's strange marriage to Vernon Whitmore's worthless daughter. Clara smoothed down her dress, one of the practical ones Gideon had bought, dark green wool that had seen better days, and tried not to panic. She should wait for Gideon, should let him handle this. But they were already at the porch, already dismounting. The woman knocked. Clara took a breath and opened the door. Up close, The woman was handsome rather than pretty, with steel gray hair pinned up severely and eyes that took in everything at once. The two men with her were younger, sons probably. They had the same sharp features, the same assessing stare. "Mrs. Vale?" the woman asked. It still felt strange being called that. "Yes. I'm Margaret Hendricks. This is my son Robert and my nephew James. We own the ranch about 15 miles south. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we were passing through and I wanted to meet Gideon's wife." She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. "May we come in?" Every instinct Clara had said to refuse, to tell them Gideon wasn't home and they should come back another time. But she'd been raised with manners, even if everything else had fallen apart. "Of course," Clara said, stepping aside. The Hendricks family entered like they owned the place, tracking mud across Clara's clean floors without seeming to notice. Margaret's gaze swept the room, cataloging every detail. "Charming," she said in a tone that meant the opposite. "Gideon's done well for himself up here. Very rustic." Clara bristled but kept her voice even. "Can I offer you coffee?" "That would be lovely." Clara went to the kitchen, grateful for something to do with her hands. She could hear them talking in the other room, not bothering to lower their voices. "She's younger than I expected," Robert said. "And prettier," James added. "Wonder what she was doing that she ended up with Vale." "Hush," Margaret said, but she didn't sound like she disagreed. The poor thing probably didn't have a choice. You know how these mountain men are. They see something they want. They take it. Clara's hands clenched around the coffee pot. She wanted to march back in there and tell them exactly how wrong they were. That Gideon had never taken anything from her. That he'd given her more respect in 4 months than she'd received in her entire life. But she didn't. She poured coffee, added cups to a tray, and brought it out with a smile that felt like it might crack her face in half. "Here you are," she said pleasantly. Margaret took a cup and sipped it, then made a small noise. "A bit strong for my taste, but serviceable." Clara sat down across from them and folded her hands in her lap. "What brings you up to Black Hollow Ridge, Mrs. Hendricks?" "As I said, we were passing through, and I'll be honest, Mrs. Vale, I was curious. Gideon's been up here for years, and we'd all assumed he'd stay a bachelor. Then we heard he'd gone down to Dust Creek and brought back a wife." She smiled that cold smile again. "Naturally, people talk." "I'm sure they do." "You're from Dust Creek, then?" "I am." "And your family, what do they do?" Clara's jaw tightened. She knew exactly where this was going. "My mother passed when I was young. My father, we're not in contact." "I see." Margaret's tone made it clear she saw far more than Clara wanted her to. "And how are you finding life on the ridge? It must be quite an adjustment from town." "It's different," Clara admitted, "but I like it." "Do you?" Margaret's eyebrows rose. "That's surprising. Most women would find this degree of isolation unbearable. No neighbors, no society, nothing but wilderness for miles." She leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, dear, do you ever worry about being so far from help? If something were to happen?" The implication was clear. If Gideon turned out to be the monster everyone assumed he was. "I'm not worried," Clara said firmly. "Well, you're braver than most, then." Margaret set down her cup. "Though I suppose you didn't have much say in the matter, did you? These arrangements rarely consider what the woman wants." Something hot and angry flared in Clara's chest. "Actually, Mrs. Hendricks, I chose to be here." "Did you?" The skepticism was palpable. "Yes." "Well," Margaret stood, brushing imaginary dust from her skirts. "I hope that remains true. But if you ever find yourself in need of assistance, a place to stay, help getting back to civilization, you should know that our door is open. We take care of our neighbors, even the unexpected ones." Clara stood as well, and she was done being polite. "That's very kind, but I won't need it. I'm exactly where I want to be." Margaret's smile went sharp. "Of course you are. Well, we should be going. Robert, James, say goodbye to Mrs. Vale." The two men muttered their farewells, and then they were all heading for the door. Clara followed, eager to have them gone. Margaret paused on the threshold. "One more thing, dear. You should know that people are watching. This situation, a mountain recluse marrying a girl from Dust Creek under mysterious circumstances, it's raised eyebrows. People wonder if you're here willingly or if you're too frightened to leave." She lowered her voice. If it's the latter, I can help. Just send word. It's not the latter, Clara said through gritted teeth. But thank you for your concern. Margaret studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Very well. Good day, Mrs. Vale. They mounted their horses and rode away, leaving Clara standing on the porch with her hands shaking from anger. How dare they? How dare they come into her home and act like she was some kind of victim who needed rescuing? How dare they assume the worst about Gideon when they didn't know anything about him? When they didn't know anything about what it meant to be actually saved instead of actually trapped? She was still standing there, fuming, when Gideon came around the side of the house, tools in hand. He saw her face and stopped. What happened? The Hendricks family paid a visit. Gideon's expression went carefully blank. What did they want? To see if I needed rescuing, apparently. Clara's voice was bitter. To make sure I knew I had options if this all became too unbearable. What did you tell them? That I'm exactly where I want to be. Gideon set down his tools and came up the porch steps. And they believed you? No, they think you're holding me hostage or that I'm too scared to admit the truth. Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. They looked at me like I was this pathetic creature who couldn't possibly know her own mind. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. I'm angry. I am angry, Gideon said quietly, but not surprised. People like the Hendricks, they need things to fit into boxes they understand. A man like me marrying a woman like you, it doesn't fit. So they make up stories that do. Clara looked at him. A woman like me? Young, pretty, from town. He paused. Too good for a mountain hermit with a bad reputation. That's not true. That's how they see it. Then they're idiots. Gideon's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Probably. Clara crossed her arms. You know what the worst part is? She acted like she was being kind, like offering to rescue me was this generous thing instead of an insult to both of us. That's how people like that operate. They wrap their judgment up in concern and expect you to be grateful. Well, I'm not grateful. I'm furious. I can see that. Clara started pacing the porch. And another thing, why does everyone assume that being isolated is the same as being imprisoned? I like it here. I like the quiet. I like not having to perform for people who wouldn't care about me anyway. I like... She stopped, realizing what she'd been about to say. Gideon was watching her carefully. What do you like? Clara took a breath. I like being here. With you. Is that so impossible to believe? Something shifted in Gideon's expression. Something vulnerable and hopeful and scared all at once. No, he said quietly, but people will keep questioning it, keep assuming the worst. It's going to happen again. Let them, Clara said fiercely. Let them think whatever they want. I know the truth. You know the truth. That's what matters. Gideon looked at her for a long moment. Then he reached out and took her hand. The first time he'd touched her in weeks except for that night with the nightmare. You're sure? He asked. About being here? I'm sure. Because if you ever change your mind, I won't. But if you do, Gideon, Clara squeezed his hand, I won't. Stop giving me escape routes I don't want. He studied her face like he was trying to memorize it. Then, slowly he smiled. A real smile, not the careful half version he usually gave. All right, he said. No more escape routes. Good. They stood there on the porch, hands linked, while the sun worked its way toward the mountains. Clara felt something settle in her chest, something that had been loose and anxious for months. She was done apologizing for choosing this life, done letting other people's assumptions make her doubt herself. She'd found something here on Black Hollow Ridge that she'd never had before. A home that felt like hers. A man who treated her like she mattered. A future that looked like something other than just survival. And she'd be damned if she'd let anyone take that away. The rest of April passed in a blur of work and mud and growing things. Clara threw herself into the garden with an intensity that surprised even her. She spent hours on her knees in the dirt, planting seeds, pulling weeds, learning which plants needed shade and which needed full sun. Gideon worked beside her when he could, showing her techniques he'd learned over the years. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together in comfortable silence, occasionally exchanging observations about the weather or the soil or the cattle. It felt domestic, normal, like they'd been married for years instead of months. One evening in early May, Clara was washing dishes when Gideon came in from checking the stock. He stopped in the doorway, just watching her. "What?" Clara asked, suddenly self-conscious. "Nothing. Just—" He shook his head. "This still doesn't feel real sometimes." "What doesn't?" "You. Here. This." Clara dried her hands and turned to face him. "It's real." "I know, but I keep expecting to wake up and find out I imagined the whole thing." "That's a terrible thing to imagine." "I've had worse." Clara moved closer. "Like what?" Gideon was quiet for a moment, then, "Like imagining going through another winter alone. Like imagining being 50 years old and realizing I'd spent my entire life building something for a ghost. Like imagining dying on this ridge with no one knowing or caring." The rawness in his voice made Clara's chest ache. "Gideon—" "I'm not saying that for sympathy," he interrupted. "I'm saying it because you should know. You think you're the only one who was saved by this marriage? You're not. I was drowning just as much as you were. I just did it quieter." Clara reached out and took his hand. "Then we saved each other." "Maybe." "Not maybe. Definitely." Gideon looked down at their joined hands. "You ever think about what happens next?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what do you want, Clara? From this? From me? From life? You never talk about the future." Clara considered the question. What did she want? 6 months ago, she would have said she wanted to survive, to make it through another day without breaking. But now, "I want to build something," she said slowly. "I want to make this place ours, not just yours. I want to see the garden grow. I want to learn how to run cattle and mend fences and do all the things that keep this place alive. I want—" She paused. "I want to matter, not to the world, but to this little piece of it, to you." "You already matter to me," Gideon said roughly. "You've always mattered." "I know, but I want to earn it. I want to be your partner, not just your wife on paper." "Does that make sense?" "Yeah, it makes sense." They stood there in the kitchen, hands linked, and Clara felt something shift between them. A door opening, a possibility becoming real. "Can I ask you something?" Clara said. "Anything." "Why haven't you tried to kiss me?" Gideon went very still. "What?" "We've been married for 5 months. You've been nothing but respectful and kind, but you've never once tried to kiss me, not even at the wedding." "Why?" "Because I told you I wouldn't force anything." "I'm not talking about force. I'm talking about—" Clara struggled to find the words. "I'm talking about wanting. Do you want to kiss me?" Gideon's jaw clenched. "That's not a fair question." "Why not?" "Because the answer doesn't matter. It matters to me." He looked at her then, and there was something desperate in his eyes. "Of course I want to kiss you. I've wanted to kiss you since the moment you said, 'I do,' in that church. But wanting something doesn't mean taking it." "What if I'm giving it?" Gideon's breath caught. "Clara, I'm not saying I'm ready for everything, but I'm ready for something, for more than this careful distance we've been keeping." She stepped closer. "Unless you don't want—" Gideon kissed her. One moment they were standing apart, and the next his hands were on her face and his mouth was on hers and everything else disappeared. The kiss was gentle, careful, like he was terrified of breaking her. Clara kissed him back, rising up on her toes, her hands gripping his shirt. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that for 15 years, he whispered. "Then why did you wait for me to ask?" "Because you deserved the choice." Clara's throat felt tight. "I'm choosing you, just so we're clear." Gideon smiled against her hair. "Just so we're clear. I chose you a long time ago." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other, and Clara realized she wasn't scared anymore. Wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop. Wasn't convinced this was all going to fall apart. She was just happy. Actually, genuinely happy. And that was terrifying in its own way. But it was also the best thing she'd ever felt. The next morning, Clara woke to find Gideon already gone. Not unusual. He often started work before dawn. But when she went downstairs, she found a note on the table. "Gone to town for supplies. Back by evening. G-Town. Dust Creek." Clara's stomach twisted. She hadn't been back since the wedding. Hadn't wanted to. The thought of seeing those familiar streets, those familiar faces, all of them knowing what her father had done. She pushed the thought away and focused on the day ahead. There was plenty to do. The garden needed weeding, laundry needed washing, the house needed cleaning. But her mind kept drifting back to Gideon riding into Dust Creek. Would he see her father? Would Vernon try to cause trouble? The day dragged. Clara worked herself into exhaustion trying not to worry, but by the time the sun started setting, she was pacing the porch like a caged animal. Finally, just as twilight was falling, she heard the wagon. Gideon came up the trail looking tired but unharmed. He pulled the wagon to a stop and started unloading supplies. "You all right?" Clara asked, coming down to help. "Fine. Long day." He handed her a sack of flour. Town was busier than usual. "Did you see my father?" Gideon's jaw tightened. "Yeah." "And?" "And nothing. Saw him outside the saloon. He saw me. We didn't talk." Clara nodded, relieved. "Good." They finished unloading in silence. But as Gideon was putting away the last of the supplies, he said casually, "He looked bad, Clara. Real bad. Thinner than I remember. Shaking." Clara's hand stilled on the jar she'd been placing in the pantry. "That's what happens when you drink more than you eat." "I know. Just thought you should know." "Why? It doesn't change anything." Gideon looked at her. "I wasn't sure if you'd want to know, if you'd care." Clara thought about it. Did she care? A part of her wanted to say no, wanted to pretend Vernon Whitmore was already dead to her. But that wasn't quite true. "I care," she admitted. "I just don't know what to do with it. He made his choices. I made mine. That's all there is." "That's fair." "Did he say anything? About me?" Gideon hesitated. "No, but people did." Clara's stomach dropped. "What did they say?" "That I'd stolen you. That you'd had no choice. That everyone knew the marriage was forced and I was keeping you prisoner up here." He paused. "Same assumptions as the Hendricks family." "And what did you say?" "Nothing. Let them think what they want." "Gideon, it doesn't matter, Clara. Their opinions don't change what's true." "But it bothers you?" "Of course it bothers me, but defending myself would just make it worse. These people, they've decided who I am. Nothing I say will change that." Clara moved closer and took his hand. "I know who you are. I know. That's what matters." "I know," he said again, softer this time. They stood there in the pantry, surrounded by jars and sacks and all the evidence of a life being built, and Clara realized something. She was done hiding from her past, done letting other people's stories define her. She couldn't control what people in Dust Creek thought, couldn't make them see the truth about Gideon or about herself, but she could control what happened here, on this ridge, in this life she was building, and that would have to be enough. A week later, Clara was in the garden when she heard a horse approaching. Just one this time. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt, and shaded her eyes against the sun. The rider was male, middle-aged, wearing a dark coat and hat. As he got closer, Clara recognized him as Dr. Milton from Dust Creek, the only doctor for 50 miles, a kind man who'd treated her mother in her final illness. He pulled his horse to a stop and tipped his hat. "Mrs. Vale, I apologize for the unexpected visit." "Dr. Milton, is something wrong?" "I'm afraid so." He dismounted and Clara could see the reluctance in his face. "It's your father. He's very ill." Clara's heart lurched. "How ill?" "Dying, I suspect. His liver's failing. I've seen it before in men who drink like he does. He has days, maybe a week at most." Clara stood very still, trying to process this. "I see. He's asking for you." "What?" "He wants to see you, says he needs to talk to you before—" Dr. Milton trailed off. "I told him I'd come up here and ask, but I'll understand if you refuse. After everything he put you through, I'll come," Clara heard herself say. Dr. Milton looked surprised. "You will?" "Yes. Not for him. For me. I need to—" She struggled to find the words. "I need to see it end. Does that make sense?" "More than you know." Clara looked back at the house. Gideon was out checking fence lines. Wouldn't be back for hours. "Can you wait while I change?" she asked. "Of course." Clara went inside and put on the blue wool dress. the first one Gideon had bought for her. She looked at herself in the small mirror and barely recognized the woman staring back. This wasn't the terrified girl who'd left Dust Creek in a ruined wedding dress. This was someone else, someone stronger, someone who could face Vernon Whitmore one last time and walk away intact. She went back outside. "I'm ready." Dr. Milton helped her onto his horse, and they started down the trail toward town. Clara didn't leave a note, but somehow she knew Gideon would understand where she'd gone, and that he'd be waiting when she got back. The ride to Dust Creek took 2 hours. Clara sat behind Dr. Milton on his horse, watching familiar landmarks appear through the trees. The old lightning-struck pine, the creek crossing where she'd lost her shoe as a child, the ridge where you could first see the town spread out below. She'd thought coming back would feel like returning to a prison. Instead, it just felt sad. Dust Creek looked smaller than she remembered, shabbier. The buildings needed paint, the streets needed grading. Everything seemed diminished somehow, like the town had been shrinking while she'd been gone. Dr. Milton guided his horse to the house on the edge of town. The house Clara had grown up in, though calling it a house was generous. It was more of a shack, barely standing, with a porch that sagged dangerously, and windows so dirty you couldn't see through them. "He's inside," Dr. Milton said, helping Clara down. "I should warn you, he doesn't look good. The jaundice has set in. His mind wanders." Clara nodded. "I understand. I'll wait out here, give you privacy. Take as long as you need." Clara walked up the rotting porch steps and pushed open the door. It wasn't locked. Nothing in this house had ever been worth stealing. The smell hit her first. Sweat and sickness and unwashed bodies, and the sour, sweet stench of alcohol seeping through skin. Clara had to breathe through her mouth to keep from gagging. Her father was in the back room, lying on a cot that had seen better decades. Dr. Milton was right. He looked terrible. His skin had gone yellow, his eyes were sunken, and he'd lost so much weight that his bones showed through like he was already halfway to skeleton. Vernon Whitmore had never been a large man, but he'd always seemed big to Clara when she was growing up. Big and loud and dangerous. Now he just looked small. His eyes opened when she entered. It took him a moment to focus. "Clara?" His voice was a rasp. "It's me. You came. Dr. Milton said you wanted to see me." Vernon tried to sit up, failed, and fell back against the filthy pillow. "Didn't think you would. Thought you'd let me die alone." "I considered it." A sound that might have been a laugh escaped him. "Fair enough." He coughed, and it turned into something wet and painful. When it finally stopped, he looked at her with eyes that held something Clara had never seen in them before. Fear. "How long do I have?" "I don't know. Dr. Milton didn't say." "Days, maybe less." Another cough. "Liver's gone. Kidneys too, probably. That's what happens when you spend 20 years trying to drink yourself to death, I guess." Finally succeeded. Clara stood near the door, not moving closer. "Why did you want to see me?" "To apologize." She hadn't expected that. "What?" "You heard me. I want to apologize, before I die, before it's too late." Vernon's yellow eyes focused on her face. "I was a terrible father, worse than terrible. I was cruel and drunk, and I blamed you for things that weren't your fault." Clara's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "Yes, you were all those things. Your mother dying, that wasn't your fault. The sickness was the sickness, but I needed someone to blame, and you were there, and I—" He stopped, struggling for breath. "I'm sorry, Clara. For all of it. For every day I made you feel like you were worthless. For selling you to Vale like you were livestock. For being the kind of man who would do that to his own child." Clara wanted to feel something, wanted this apology to mean something, but all she felt was tired. "Why now?" she asked. "Why wait until you're dying?" "Because I'm a coward. Always have been. Could only face what I'd done when there was no time left to live with it." Vernon coughed again. "Are you happy? Up there on that ridge with Vale?" "Yes." "He treating you right?" "Better than I ever thought possible." "Good. That's good." Vernon closed his eyes. "He paid me $300 for you. Did you know that?" Clara's stomach twisted. She'd known money changed hands, but not how much. "No. $300. Most money I'd ever seen. I spent it all in 6 weeks. Gambling, drinking, trying to fill the hole where my daughter used to be. He opened his eyes again. I knew what I was doing was wrong, knew it and did it anyway, because I was weak, because the money mattered more than you did. I know. Do you hate me? Clara thought about it. Really thought about it. Did she hate Vernon Whitmore? This dying man who'd made her childhood a nightmare and her young adulthood a slow suffocation? No, she said finally. I don't hate you. I don't feel much of anything for you anymore. You're like a bad storm that finally passed. I survived you, that's all. Vernon made a sound that might have been a sob. That's worse than hate. Maybe, but it's the truth. I don't deserve your forgiveness. No, you don't. But I'm asking for it anyway. Vernon's voice cracked. I'm asking my daughter to forgive me for being the worst thing that ever happened to her. Because I'm scared, Clara. I'm scared of dying with all this weight on me. I'm scared of what comes after. I'm scared. Stop, Clara said quietly. Vernon stopped. Clara moved closer to the cot, close enough to see the tears tracking through the grime on his face, close enough to smell the death on him. I can't give you forgiveness, she said. I'm not there yet. Maybe I never will be. But I can tell you this. I'm going to be okay. You didn't destroy me, even though you tried. I found something better than this. Someone who sees me as more than a burden, a life that feels like it's mine. So whatever happens to you after you die, whatever you're afraid of facing, that's between you and your conscience. I'm done carrying your shame for you. Vernon closed his eyes. More tears leaked out. I understand. Do you? I think so. He opened his eyes one last time. You look different, stronger, like your mother used to look before I broke her too. I'm nothing like my mother, Clara said. She stayed. I left. Smart girl. Clara turned toward the door. Clara? Vernon called weakly. She stopped but didn't turn around. Thank you for coming. You didn't have to. I know. You're a better person than I ever was. That's not a high bar to clear. She heard him laugh, actually laugh, and then she was walking out through the filthy house into the clean air outside. Dr. Milton was waiting by his horse, holding the reins. How was it? He asked gently. Exactly as bad as I expected. Clara took a shaky breath. Can you take me back now? I want to go home. Of course. They were about to mount when Clara heard someone call her name. She turned and saw Margaret Hendricks approaching, dressed in town clothes, carrying a basket. Perfect. Just perfect. Mrs. Vale, Margaret said, her eyes sharp with curiosity. I heard you were in town. Visiting your father, I assume. Word travels fast. It always does in a place like this. Margaret glanced at the house. How is he? Dying. I see. How unfortunate. But she didn't sound like she thought it was unfortunate at all. I must say I'm surprised to see you here. I assumed after our conversation at the Ridge that you'd have no interest in returning to Dust Creek. I didn't, but he asked to see me. And you came. How charitable. Margaret's tone made it clear she thought it was foolish, not charitable. Tell me, does your husband know you're here? Clara's patience snapped. Mrs. Hendricks, with all due respect, my marriage and my choices are none of your business. Margaret's eyebrows rose. I was simply expressing concern. No, you were fishing for gossip, and I'm not interested in providing it. Clara turned to Dr. Milton. Can we go? Absolutely. Mrs. Vale, Margaret called as Clara mounted the horse. You should know that people are talking about your father selling you, about the money that changed hands, about what kind of man pays $300 for a wife. Clara looked down at her. Let them talk. I don't care what people think they know about my life. You should care. Reputation matters, especially for women in your position. My position? Clara laughed, and it wasn't a kind sound. Mrs. Hendricks, I spent 24 years in this town being Vernon Whitmore's worthless daughter. My reputation was destroyed before I was old enough to understand what reputation meant. So forgive me if I don't particularly care what the good people of Dust Creek think about my marriage to a man who's shown me more respect in 6 months than this entire town showed me in my whole life. Margaret's face went rigid. Well, I can see there's no reasoning with you. There's nothing to reason about. I made my choice. I'm happy with it. That's all there is. Clara nodded to Dr. Milton, and they rode away, leaving Margaret Hendricks standing in the street looking deeply offended. They were halfway back to the ridge when Dr. Milton said quietly, "That was well said. What you told Mrs. Hendricks." "I'm tired of explaining myself." "You shouldn't have to. Anyone with eyes can see you're better off with Vale than you ever were here." Clara glanced at him. "Can they?" "I can, and I've known you since you were a child, Clara. I saw what your father did to you, how he ground you down year after year. When Vale came to town asking for your hand, I thought it was the strangest thing I'd ever witnessed. But now—" He shook his head. "Now I think he might have been the only person who saw what the rest of us were too blind to notice." "What's that?" "That you were dying here just as surely as your father's dying now, just slower. And that someone needed to get you out before it was too late." Clara's eyes burned. "Thank you for saying that." "Just the truth." Dr. Milton was quiet for a moment, then, "Your father probably won't last the night. I know. Will you come back for the burial?" Clara thought about it, thought about standing over Vernon Whitmore's grave while the whole town watched and whispered, thought about pretending to grieve for a man who'd made her life hell. "No," she said. "I said my goodbye today. That's enough." "I understand. I'll make sure he's buried properly, next to your mother, if that's all right." "It's fine." Clara paused. "Send me the bill for whatever it costs. I'll pay it." "You don't have to." "I want to. Not for him. For me. So I can close this door completely and know I don't owe him anything. Not even a burial." Dr. Milton nodded. "I'll send it to the ridge." They rode the rest of the way in silence. When they finally reached Black Hollow Ridge, the sun was setting and Gideon was on the porch, pacing. He saw them coming and his whole body relaxed, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the worry in his eyes. Dr. Milton helped Clara down from the horse. Gideon came down the porch steps but stopped a few feet away, like he wasn't sure if he should approach. "Your wife is a remarkable woman, Mr. Vale," Dr. Milton said. "Take care of her." "I will." Dr. Milton tipped his hat and rode away, leaving Clara and Gideon standing in the dimming light. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Gideon asked, "You all right?" Clara shook her head. "Not really." "What do you need?" Can you hold me? Just for a minute." Gideon closed the distance between them in 2 steps and pulled her into his arms. Clara buried her face in his chest and let herself shake. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough over Vernon Whitmore in her life. But she shook, and Gideon held her, solid and warm and steady, until the shaking stopped. "He's dying," Clara said into Gideon's shirt. "Tonight, probably." "I'm sorry." "I'm not. Is that terrible?" "No. I should feel something more than relief, shouldn't I? He's my father. He's dying, and all I feel is relieved that it'll finally be over." Gideon pulled back enough to look at her face. "He was a terrible father. You don't owe him grief just because he's blood." "I know, but I still feel like I should—" "Should what? Pretend 24 years of cruelty didn't happen? Pretend he deserves mourning he never earned?" Gideon shook his head. "You went to see him. You listened to whatever he had to say. That's more than he deserved. The rest is up to you." Clara looked up at him. "He apologized." "Did he?" "Yes. Said he was sorry for everything, for being cruel, for selling me, for all of it." "And what did you say?" "I told him I couldn't forgive him. Not yet. Maybe not ever." Clara's voice cracked slightly. "Was that wrong?" "No. It was honest. He was scared of dying, of whatever comes after. He wanted forgiveness to make it easier." "That's not your job," Gideon said firmly. "Making his death easier. You don't owe him comfort." "I know, but he looked so small, so pathetic. Nothing like the man who used to terrify me." Gideon cupped her face gently. "That doesn't erase what he did. Being weak at the end doesn't make him less of a monster during the middle." Clara closed her eyes and leaned into his touch. "How are you so sure about all this?" "Because I know what it's like to wait for someone to save you, and I know what it's like when they finally do." He paused. "You don't owe your father anything, not forgiveness, not grief, not even your presence at his grave. You owe yourself peace. However you get there is the right way." Clara opened her eyes. "I'm not going to the burial." "Good. Mrs. Hendricks cornered me in town. tried to make me feel guilty about everything, about leaving, about not caring what people think, about you. What did you tell her? That I don't care what Dust Creek thinks about my life, that I'm happy here, that she could take her concern and... Clara stopped. Well, I was polite about it, mostly. Gideon smiled. I wish I could have seen that. She thinks you're holding me prisoner, or that I'm too scared to admit the truth. Let her think what she wants. That's what I said. Clara took a deep breath. I'm done with that town, done with those people, done with pretending their opinions matter. This is my home now. You're my home, and I'm not apologizing for that anymore. Something intense flashed in Gideon's eyes. Say that again. What? The last part. You're my home? Yeah, that. Clara looked at him. This man who'd waited 15 years for her, who'd built a life around a memory, who'd given her space to heal without asking for anything in return. You're my home, she said again, stronger this time. This place is my home. I'm not going anywhere. Gideon kissed her then, hard and desperate and full of all the things he never said out loud. Clara kissed him back with equal intensity, her hands fisting in his shirt, anchoring herself to him. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Gideon rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said roughly. I know it's too soon, and I know you might not feel the same, and I know I should probably wait, but I can't. I love you, Clara. I've loved you since I was 10 years old, and you gave me bread behind your father's barn. I'll love you until the day I die. Clara's breath caught. Gideon, you don't have to say it back. I just needed you to know, needed you to hear it. You're not alone. You're not unwanted. You're loved. You've always been loved. Tears were streaming down Clara's face now. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to be loved. I don't know. Then we'll learn together. No rush, no pressure. Just stay. Keep choosing this. Keep choosing me. That's all I need. Clara pulled him down and kissed him again, tasting salt and desperation and something that felt like the opposite of fear. I'm choosing you, she whispered against his mouth. I'll keep choosing you, every day, for as long as you'll have me. That's forever then. Forever sounds good. They stood there on the porch while the sun disappeared behind the mountains and the first stars came out, holding each other, breathing together, building something neither of them had ever thought they'd have. Vernon Whitmore died that night, just as Dr. Milton predicted. Word reached the ridge 3 days later via a rider delivering mail and supplies. Clara received the news while working in the garden. She thanked the rider, went back to pulling weeds, and didn't cry. Gideon came out from the barn an hour later and found her still working. You heard? He asked. Yes. You all right? Clara sat back on her heels and looked at the garden she'd planted. The green shoots pushing through the earth, the promise of growth and life and things that would bloom. Yes, she said. I think I am. Gideon knelt beside her in the dirt. What do you need? Nothing. I just want to keep working, want to keep building this, want to keep moving forward. We can do that. They worked side by side until the sun started setting, planting and weeding and nurturing things that would grow strong despite the harsh mountain soil. And Clara realized that she'd been wrong about so many things. She'd been wrong about love being a cage, about kindness having a price, about herself being worthless. She'd been wrong about what it meant to be saved, because Gideon hadn't saved her from her father, or from Dust Creek, or from poverty. He'd saved her from believing that survival was the same as living. He'd shown her the difference, and now she was learning how to live instead of just survive, learning how to plant things and watch them grow, learning how to be someone's home and let someone be hers, learning that the opposite of fear wasn't courage, it was love. A week after Vernon's death, Clara woke early and went downstairs to find Gideon already making coffee. He looked up when she entered and smiled that rare, genuine smile that still made her chest feel too full. Morning, he said. Morning. Clara moved to stand beside him. I've been thinking. About? About us. About this. She gestured at the house, the ridge, everything they'd built. I want to make it official. Gideon frowned. It is official. We're married. No, I mean, that wedding in Dust Creek wasn't for us. It was for my father and his debts and everyone else. I want to do it again, just us, the way it should have been from the start. Gideon went very still. You want to marry me again? Yes. No church, no witnesses, no town gossip. Just you and me and vows that actually mean something. Clara took his hand. I want to choose you out loud, with my whole heart, without fear or force or anyone else's expectations. Will you marry me, Gideon Vale? Gideon's eyes went bright. Yeah, I'll marry you. Good, Clara smiled, because I already know what I want to say. When? Whenever you're ready. Gideon set down the coffee pot and pulled something from his pocket, a small cloth bundle. He unwrapped it carefully, and Clara saw 2 rings, carved from pale wood, simple and beautiful, clearly made with painstaking care. I've been working on these since February, Gideon said quietly. Made them during those nights in the barn when I couldn't sleep. Didn't know if I'd ever give them to you, didn't know if you'd want them, but I made them anyway, just in case. Clara picked up the smaller ring and held it up to the morning light. The wood was smooth as silk, the grain flowing like water. It's beautiful, she whispered. It's yours, if you want it. Clara looked at him. Now? Why not? We're in the kitchen in our night clothes, drinking coffee. So? You said no church, no witnesses, just us. Gideon took her hand. This is us, Clara. This is what our life looks like. Might as well make it official right here. Clara laughed, and it felt like joy. All right here. Right now. They stood facing each other in the kitchen while dawn light crept through the windows. No reverend, no guests, no ceremony beyond what they created themselves. Gideon went first, his voice steady and sure. I, Gideon Vale, take you, Clara Whitmore, as my wife. Not because I paid for you or because anyone forced this, but because you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Because you saw me as human when no one else did. Because you're strong and brave and deserve every good thing this world has to offer. I promise to protect you, respect you, and love you for the rest of my life. I promise to give you space when you need it and closeness when you want it. I promise to build this life with you, not for you. You're my partner, my equal, my home. Clara's hands were shaking as she began. I, Clara Whitmore, take you, Gideon Vale, as my husband. Because you waited 15 years for a memory. Because you built a home for a ghost and made it real for a woman. Because you gave me choices when everyone else just took. Because you showed me that love doesn't have to hurt. I promise to choose you every day. To build this life with you. To be your partner and your equal. To show you that the faith you had in that little girl wasn't misplaced. You're my home, Gideon. The first real home I've ever had. Gideon slipped the smaller ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Clara took the larger ring and slid it onto his hand, and something locked into place between them. Something that had been building for months, but only now became real. That's it then, Gideon said softly. We're married. For real this time. For real, Clara agreed. And then Gideon kissed her like she was the answer to every question he'd ever asked. And Clara kissed him back like she finally understood what it meant to be found. The wooden ring on Clara's finger caught the morning light as she worked in the garden, and she found herself stopping to look at it a dozen times that first day. Not because it was beautiful, though it was, but because it meant something different now. It wasn't a transaction. It wasn't a bargain struck in desperation. It was a choice she'd made with her whole heart, and that changed everything. Gideon wore his ring too, and Clara noticed him touching it absently throughout the day, while he worked, while he ate. Like he needed to remind himself it was real. They didn't talk about the kitchen ceremony again. Didn't need to. What had happened between them that morning existed beyond words now, settled deep into the marrow of their shared life. But the peace didn't last long. 3 days later, Clara was hanging laundry when she heard riders approaching. Multiple horses again, her stomach dropped, and she was reaching for the rifle Gideon now kept by the door when she recognized the lead horse. Dr. Milton. But he wasn't alone. Behind him rode 2 men Clara didn't recognize, well-dressed, official-looking, the kind of men who carried authority like a weapon. Gideon appeared from the barn, saw the riders, and his whole body went tense. He moved to stand beside Clara, close enough that their shoulders touched. Dr. Milton dismounted first, and Clara could see the apology written all over his face. Mrs. Vale, Mr. Vale, I'm sorry for this intrusion. These gentlemen insisted I bring them up here. He gestured to the two men. This is Thomas Garrett, county magistrate, and his associate, Mr. Reynolds. The magistrate was in his 50s, gray-haired and stern-faced. He looked at Clara and Gideon like they were problems to be solved. Mr. Vale, Mrs. Vale, he said with a curt nod. I apologize for arriving unannounced, but we have a matter that requires immediate attention. What matter? Gideon's voice was flat, careful. Several concerned citizens have brought allegations regarding your marriage, specifically that it was coerced, that money changed hands in exchange for Mrs. Vale, and that she may be here against her will. Clara's hands clenched into fists. Let me guess. Margaret Hendricks. The magistrate's expression didn't change. I'm not at liberty to discuss who filed the complaint, but given the serious nature of the allegations, I'm required to investigate, to speak with Mrs. Vale privately and ensure she's not being held under duress. She's not, Gideon said. With respect, Mr. Vale, that's for her to confirm. Alone. Clara felt Gideon's tension spike, but he didn't argue, just looked at her, a question in his eyes. It's fine, Clara said quietly. Let them ask their questions. The magistrate gestured toward the house. May we? Clara led them inside, Gideon following until the magistrate held up a hand. Alone, Mr. Vale, that's the protocol. The hell it is. Gideon, Clara interrupted. It's all right, go check on the cattle, I'll handle this. For a moment she thought he'd refuse, but then he nodded once, sharp and angry, and walked away. Inside, the magistrate and his associate sat at Clara's table while she stood near the stove, arms crossed. Dr. Milton stayed by the door, looking miserable. Mrs. Vale, the magistrate began, pulling out a small notebook. I need you to answer some questions honestly. You won't face consequences for telling the truth, regardless of what that truth is. I know what the truth is. Good. Then this should be simple. He consulted his notes. Is it true that your father, Vernon Whitmore, received $300 from Gideon Vale in exchange for arranging your marriage? Yes. And you were aware of this transaction? Not initially, but yes, I found out later. The magistrate wrote something down. Were you given a choice in this arrangement? Did you consent to the marriage freely? Clara's jaw tightened. Define freely. Were you forced or coerced in any way? My father made it clear I was marrying Gideon whether I wanted to or not. So no, I didn't have a choice at first. The associate leaned forward. Are you saying you were forced into this marriage? I'm saying my father sold me to pay his debts, but that's what we needed to hear, the magistrate interrupted. Mrs. Vale, if you're being held here against your will, we can help. We can arrange safe transport back to town, ensure you have protection, and begin annulment proceedings. Stop, Clara said sharply. You didn't let me finish. The magistrate paused. Go on. My father forced the marriage. That's true. But everything after that was my choice. Gideon never forced me to do anything, never touched me without permission, never made me feel like anything less than a human being deserving of respect. He gave me my own room, my own space, my own life. And somewhere along the way, I chose to stay. I chose him. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. Mrs. Vale, I'm not finished. Clara's voice was steel now. You want to know if I'm here against my will? I'm not. You want to know if I'm being held prisoner? I'm not. You want to know if my husband is the monster everyone in Dust Creek seems to think he is? He's not. He's the best thing that ever happened to me. So whoever filed this complaint can take their concern and shove it straight to hell, because I don't need rescuing. The magistrate exchanged a look with his associate. Mrs. Vale, I understand you may feel loyalty to your husband. This isn't loyalty. This is truth. Sometimes victims of coercion don't recognize. Don't you dare, Clara said, her voice dropping to something dangerous. Don't you dare tell me I don't know my own mind. I spent 24 years being told I was worthless, being told I didn't matter, being told my thoughts and feelings meant nothing. I'm done with that. I know exactly what I want. I want to be here. I want this life. I want him. And no magistrate from town is going to tell me otherwise. Dr. Milton cleared his throat. If I may, I've known Clara since she was a child. I've seen her before and after this marriage. The difference is remarkable. She's not a victim. She's thriving. The magistrate looked at Dr. Milton, then back at Clara. You're certain? Because once I close this investigation, it's closed. If you need help later, I won't need help. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." The magistrate studied her face for a long moment. Then he closed his notebook. "Very well. Based on Mrs. Vale's testimony and my own observation, I see no evidence of coercion or unlawful detention. The complaint will be dismissed." "Good," Clara said. They stood to leave, but the associate paused. "For what it's worth, Mrs. Vale, I hope you're right about all this." "I am." Clara walked them to the door and watched them mount their horses. Gideon was standing by the barn, rigid with tension, waiting. The magistrate rode over to him. Clara couldn't hear what was said, but she saw Gideon's shoulders drop slightly. Relief. Then they were gone, and Gideon was walking back to the house. He stopped at the porch steps, looking up at Clara. "You all right?" "Better than all right." Clara came down to stand in front of him. "I told them the truth, that I'm here because I want to be, that you're not holding me prisoner, that this is my choice." "What did they say?" "They said the complaint is dismissed." Clara took his hands. "Margaret Hendricks tried to ruin this, tried to take it away from us, and she failed." Gideon pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I thought they were going to take you. I thought, they can't take me. I won't let them." Clara pulled back enough to look at his face. "I meant what I said in there. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing you every single day, and nobody gets to tell me that's wrong." Gideon kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her mouth. "I love you." "I love you too," Clara said, and realized it was the first time she'd said it out loud. Gideon went very still. "Say that again." "I love you," Clara smiled. "I love you, Gideon Vale. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it." "You're not scared anymore?" "Oh, I'm terrified, but not of you, not of this. I'm scared of how much I want this to work, how much I need it to work." She paused. "But I'm learning that being scared doesn't mean I can't also be brave." Gideon rested his forehead against hers. "We're going to make this work. No matter what anyone says, no matter who tries to interfere. This is ours." "Ours," Clara agreed. And standing there in the Montana sunshine with Gideon's arms around her and a wooden ring on her finger, Clara realized something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop anymore, wasn't bracing for the inevitable disaster. She was just living, actually living, not just surviving. It felt like freedom. The summer arrived in full force, transforming Black Hollow Ridge into something alive and green. Clara's garden flourished beyond anything she'd imagined. Vegetables grew thick and healthy, herbs spread like wild things, and she'd even managed to coax some wildflowers into blooming near the house. She and Gideon fell into a rhythm that felt natural as breathing. They worked together during the day, tending cattle, mending fences, harvesting vegetables. They ate together at night, talking about everything and nothing, and they slept in the same bed now, not in the separate rooms they'd maintained for so long. That transition had happened gradually. One night in June, Clara had been lying in her bed staring at the ceiling when she'd gotten up, crossed the hall, and knocked on Gideon's door. He'd opened it, concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing. Clara had taken a breath. "I don't want to sleep alone anymore." Gideon had stepped aside wordlessly, and Clara had climbed into his bed. He'd followed, careful to keep distance between them, until Clara had closed it herself, curling into his side like she belonged there. "This okay?" she'd asked. "More than okay." They'd slept like that every night since. The physical intimacy had grown slowly, carefully, both of them learning each other's boundaries and desires. Gideon never pushed, never demanded. He waited for Clara to come to him, to show him what she wanted. And Clara, who'd spent her whole life being told her wants didn't matter, was learning how to ask for things, how to say yes and mean it, how to say no and be heard. It wasn't perfect. They fought sometimes, about small things mostly, the kind of disagreements that came from two people learning to share a life. Clara's temper flared hot and fast when she felt cornered. Gideon retreated into silence when he felt overwhelmed. They were both broken in different ways, carrying scars that didn't heal overnight. But they learned. They learned to talk instead of stew, to ask instead of assume, to give each other space when needed and closeness when wanted. They learned that love wasn't about being perfect. It was about choosing to stay even when things got hard. One evening in late July, Clara was sitting on the porch watching the sun set when she heard a rider approaching. Just one horse this time, moving slowly. Her hand went automatically to the rifle, but then she recognized the horse. Dr. Milton's. He looked exhausted as he dismounted, older than the last time Clara had seen him. "Dr. Milton," Clara called. "Is everything all right?" "Evening, Mrs. Vale. I apologize for arriving so late. Is your husband around?" "In the barn. I'll get him." Gideon appeared a moment later, and they all went inside. Clara made coffee while Dr. Milton settled at the table, and she could feel the weight of whatever news he was carrying. "I came to tell you something you have a right to know," Dr. Milton said finally. "Margaret Hendricks is spreading rumors through town, saying that you, Mrs. Vale, are being held against your will despite what you told the magistrate, saying you were coerced into defending your husband, saying someone should do something before it's too late." Clara's hands tightened on her coffee cup. "She won't let this go." "No, she won't. And I'm afraid she's convincing people. There's talk of sending another investigator, maybe even the territorial marshal." "Let them come," Gideon said flatly. "Clara can tell them the same thing she told the magistrate." "I know. But I wanted to warn you. Wanted you to be prepared." Dr. Milton looked at Clara. "There's also talk about your father's estate. He left debts. The house in Dust Creek is being seized to pay them. Some people are saying you should contest it, claim what's rightfully yours." Clara laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There's nothing rightful about that house. Let them take it. I don't want anything from Vernon Whitmore." "That's what I told them you'd say?" Dr. Milton paused. "There's one more thing. Some of your father's belongings were found in the house, personal items. I took the liberty of bringing a few things I thought you might want." He pulled a small bundle from his coat and set it on the table. Clara unwrapped it slowly. Inside was her mother's wedding ring, a simple gold band worn thin, a locket with a faded photograph of her mother as a young woman, and a letter, sealed with wax, addressed to Clara in her mother's handwriting. Clara's hand started shaking. "Where did you find this?" "Hidden in a loose board beneath the kitchen floor. Your father probably didn't even know it was there." Clara picked up the letter with trembling fingers. The wax seal was old, brittle. She broke it carefully and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Her mother had written this while sick, probably in the final weeks of her life. "My dearest Clara," it began, "if you're reading this, I'm gone. I'm sorry I couldn't stay longer. Sorry I couldn't protect you from what's coming. Your father is not a good man, and he will not be a good father. He will hurt you with words and neglect and the weight of his own failures. Please know that none of it is your fault. You are good and kind and worthy of love, no matter what he tells you. I saw you give bread to that orphan boy behind the barn. I saw how you looked at him, like he mattered. That's who you are, Clara. Someone who sees people, someone who cares. Don't let your father kill that in you. Don't let him convince you that you're anything less than extraordinary. And if you ever get the chance to leave, take it. Run and don't look back. Build a life that's yours. Find someone who sees you the way you saw that boy. Like you matter, because you do. You always have. I love you more than words can say. Your mother." Clara read it twice, tears streaming down her face before she could speak. "She knew," Clara whispered. "She knew what he'd do to me, and she tried to warn me." Gideon moved his chair closer and put his arm around her shoulders. "She also knew who you were, who you'd always be. She saw me with you, that day with the bread. She knew. She saw what I saw, someone worth keeping." Clara folded the letter carefully and held it against her chest. "I wish she'd lived. I wish she could have seen this, could have known I got out." "Maybe she does know," Dr. Milton said gently. "Wherever she is." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Dr. Milton stood. "I should go. It's a long ride back. But I wanted you to have those things. And I wanted you to know that despite what Margaret Hendricks says, there are people in Dust Creek who are happy for you, who see that you're better off here. We're just quieter than the ones who aren't." "Thank you," Clara managed, "for everything." After he left, Clara sat at the table holding her mother's letter while Gideon cleaned up the coffee cups. Finally, she said, "I want to go back." Gideon turned. "What?" "To Dust Creek. I want to face Margaret Hendricks directly. I want to tell the whole town, anyone who'll listen, that I'm here by choice, that I'm happy, that they need to leave us alone. Clara looked at him. Will you come with me? Of course. But are you sure? You don't owe them explanations. I know. But I owe myself closure. I need to stand in front of these people and show them I'm not the scared girl they remember. I'm not Vernon Whitmore's worthless daughter anymore. I'm Clara Vale, and I'm done letting anyone make me feel small. Gideon crossed the room and knelt in front of her chair. Then we'll go, together. And you can say whatever you need to say. What if they don't believe me? Then they don't believe you, but at least you'll know you tried. Clara touched his face, this man who'd given her everything without asking for anything in return. When did you get so wise? I'm not wise. I just know you. And I know that you need to do this to move forward. He was right. Clara had spent months building a new life on Black Hollow Ridge, but part of her was still tethered to Dust Creek, still waiting for someone from her past to show up and drag her back, still carrying shame that didn't belong to her. It was time to cut that tether. They rode into Dust Creek 3 days later on a Saturday morning when the town would be busy with weekend business. Clara wore her best dress, the dark blue wool Gideon had bought her, and sat tall in the wagon seat beside her husband. People stopped and stared as they rolled down Main Street. Whispers followed them like flies. Gideon pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the general store, the most public, visible spot in town. Clara climbed down before he could help her and stood in the street, chin up, shoulders back. A crowd was already gathering. Clara saw familiar faces. The shopkeeper, the blacksmith, the reverend who'd married them. She saw Margaret Hendricks standing near the dress shop, arms crossed, looking smug. And she saw pity in too many eyes. Clara cleared her throat and raised her voice. I know most of you. You've known me my whole life. You watched me grow up in Vernon Whitmore's house. You saw what he was, what he did, and you didn't do anything about it. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. I'm not here to blame you for that, Clara continued. I'm here because someone in this town, I won't say who, but we all know, has been spreading lies about my marriage. Saying I'm being held prisoner, saying I'm too scared to ask for help, saying someone needs to rescue me from my husband. She looked directly at Margaret Hendricks. So I'm here to set the record straight. My father sold me to pay his debts. That's true. I didn't want to marry Gideon Vale. That's also true. But everything after that wedding was my choice. My husband gave me my own room, my own life, my own freedom. He never forced me to do anything, never hurt me, never made me feel like anything less than a person who mattered. Clara's voice grew stronger. I fell in love with him. That's my choice too. I choose to live on Black Hollow Ridge. I choose to build a life with a man who sees me as an equal. I choose to be Clara Vale instead of Vernon Whitmore's daughter. And I'm asking, no, I'm demanding, that you respect that choice. Stop sending investigators. Stop spreading rumors. Stop trying to rescue someone who doesn't need rescuing. She paused, looking around at the crowd. I know it's easier to believe I'm a victim. It fits the story better. Poor Clara, trapped by a mountain man too scared to ask for help. But that's not my story. My story is that I got out of a bad situation and found something good. And I'm not ashamed of that. I'm proud of it. Margaret Hendricks stepped forward. That's exactly what someone under duress would say. He just sighed. No, Clara interrupted. That's what someone telling the truth would say. And you know what the difference is between you and me, Mrs. Hendricks? You need me to be a victim because it makes you feel important, like you're doing good work by trying to save me. But I don't need saving. I needed saving 24 years ago when my father started drinking himself to death and taking me down with him. Where were you then? Where were any of you? Silence. That's what I thought. Clara turned to address the whole crowd. I'm grateful to the people who helped me when they could. Dr. Milton, the Reverend's wife who gave me food when my father forgot to buy any. The shopkeeper who let me sweep floors for credit. You did what you could, and I appreciate it. But the rest of you, you watched and did nothing. So don't pretend now that you care about my well-being. Don't use me as your moral crusade when you ignored me for decades. She took Gideon's hand. This man built a home for me, gave me respect, gave me choices, gave me love. That's more than this town ever did. So I'm asking one last time, leave us alone. Let me live my life in peace. That's all I want. The crowd was silent. Some people looked ashamed, others angry. Margaret Hendricks looked like she'd bitten into something rotten. Then, from the back, someone started clapping. It was the Reverend's wife, a small woman Clara barely remembered. But she was clapping, and then Dr. Milton joined in, and then a few others. Not everyone, not even most. But enough that Clara felt something loosen in her chest. The Reverend stepped forward. "I think we owe Mrs. Vale an apology. She's right. We stood by for years while her father destroyed her. We have no right to question her choices now." "Thank you," Clara said quietly. Margaret Hendricks made a disgusted sound and stormed away. A few people followed her, but others stayed, and some even approached to shake Clara's hand or murmur words of support. It wasn't universal acceptance. It wasn't complete vindication, but it was enough. When they finally left Dust Creek an hour later, Clara felt lighter than she had in months. She leaned against Gideon's shoulder as the wagon climbed back toward the ridge. "You were incredible," Gideon said. "The way you stood up there and told them off, I've never seen anything like it." "I was terrified. Couldn't tell." "Good. That means I'm getting better at this." "At what?" "Being brave. Being the person my mother thought I could be." Clara pulled out the letter she'd tucked into her pocket and read it again, the words almost memorized now. "She told me to find someone who sees me like I matter. I found him." Gideon's arm tightened around her. "I've always seen you." "I know. That's why I love you." They rode the rest of the way home in comfortable silence, and when Black Hollow Ridge came into view, Clara felt something she'd never expected to feel looking at any place. Pure, uncomplicated joy. This was home. Not because it was perfect, not because everything was easy, but because it was hers. The rest of the summer passed like a dream Clara kept expecting to wake from, but never did. She and Gideon harvested the garden together, preserving vegetables for winter in jars they'd store in the root cellar. They mended the barn roof before the autumn rains came. They sat on the porch in the evenings, watching the sun set over the mountains, talking about plans for next spring. They talked about expanding the garden, maybe getting some chickens, possibly trading with neighboring ranches instead of making the long trip to Dust Creek for every supply run. They talked about the future like it was something real, something they'd both lived to see. One night in September, Clara woke to find Gideon's side of the bed empty. She got up and found him on the porch, sitting on the steps, looking out at the moonlit ridge. "Can't sleep?" she asked, wrapping a shawl around her shoulders against the chill. "Just thinking." Clara sat beside him. "About what?" "About how different this is from what I imagined. When I was building this place, planning for the day I'd ask for your hand, I thought I knew what it would be like. Thought I had it all figured out." He paused. "But reality is better than any plan I could have made." "Yeah?" "Yeah, because I planned for the girl I remembered, the kind child who gave me bread. But I got you beat. The woman who survived hell and came out stronger, who learned to shoot and garden and stand up to entire towns, who chose me even when you didn't have to." He looked at her. "You're so much more than I ever imagined, and I'm so damn lucky." Clara's throat felt tight. "I'm the lucky one. You gave me a life worth living." We gave each other that. And that was the truth of it, Clara realized. Neither of them had saved the other. They'd saved each other. Two broken people building something whole together. "I want to plant roses," Clara said suddenly. Gideon blinked. "What?" "In the spring. I want to plant wild roses beneath the windows. My mother loved roses, had a whole garden of them before she got sick, and my father let them die. I want to bring them back. Want to make something beautiful here." "Then we'll plant roses," Gideon said simply. "As many as you want." Clara leaned her head on his shoulder. "Thank you. For all of this. For waiting. For hoping. For giving me time to catch up to what you felt. Thank you for choosing to stay." They sat there on the porch steps while the moon climbed higher and the night air grew cold, and Clara thought about all the paths that had led her here, the cruelty and loss, the fear and shame, the moment in a decrepit church when she'd said "I do" to a stranger and thought her life was over. She'd been wrong about so many things. But mostly, she'd been wrong about herself. She'd thought she was worthless, broken, incapable of being loved. But she'd learned something vital on Black Hollow Ridge. Worth wasn't something other people gave you. It was something you discovered in yourself when someone finally gave you the space to look. Gideon hadn't made her valuable. He'd just been the first person to recognize she always had been, and that made all the difference. Spring came again to Black Hollow Ridge, and with it, Clara's roses. She planted them exactly where she'd imagined, beneath the bedroom windows, along the porch, near the front gate. Wild roses in every color she could find, gathered from the mountains and nursed carefully until they took root in the dark soil. Gideon built a small bench near the rose garden, and Clara spent hours there in the warm spring sunshine, reading her mother's letter, thinking about the past and the future and the present all tangled together. She thought about this girl she'd been, scared and small and convinced she didn't deserve better. She thought about the woman she'd become, strong and whole, and learning every day that love didn't have to hurt. And she thought about the life they were building, one day at a time, one choice at a time. One morning in May, almost exactly a year after she and Gideon had married each other for real in the kitchen, Clara woke to find him already up. She followed the sound of hammering and found him in the clearing south of the house, building something new. "What are you making?" she called. Gideon looked up, grinning. "Come see." Clara walked over and realized he was framing out the foundation for another structure, small but well planned. "What is it?" she asked. "A workshop. For you. Thought you might want space to do things. Sewing, woodworking, whatever you want. Your own space. Not just the house, but something that's completely yours." Clara stared at the framework taking shape. "You're building me a workshop. If you want it. If you don't, I can turn it into storage or—" Clara kissed him, hard and sudden and grateful. "I want it. I absolutely want it." "Good. Because I already bought the windows." They worked on it together over the next few weeks, and Clara learned how to frame walls and hang doors and fit windows into openings. Her hands got calloused. Her back got sore. She'd never been happier. By June, the workshop was finished, and Clara filled it with projects. She started sewing quilts to sell at market, started carving small figures from wood, birds mostly, like the hawk she'd made as a child, started learning leatherwork from Gideon, making bridles and belts and bags. She was creating things, building things, making her mark on the world in small but meaningful ways. And every evening, she and Gideon would walk through the rose garden together, checking on the blooms, pulling weeds, talking about their day. It was simple, ordinary, everything Clara had never thought she'd have. One evening in late June, Clara stood in the rose garden while Gideon was finishing evening chores, and she realized something profound. She wasn't afraid anymore. Not of abandonment, not of cruelty, not of someone coming to take this away. She'd spent so long waiting for disaster that she'd forgotten what it felt like to just exist, without dread, without bracing for impact. This was what safety felt like. This was what home felt like. This was what love felt like when it wasn't twisted up with control or possession or transaction. It was quiet, steady, built on choices made fresh every single day. Gideon came up behind her, slipping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "How far we've come. How different everything is from a year ago." "Good different?" "The best different." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "You know what I realized? We never had a honeymoon, never went anywhere, or did anything to celebrate getting married. We were too busy surviving winter and planting gardens." "Exactly. So I was thinking, maybe next spring, when the weather's good, we could take a trip. Go somewhere we've never been. See something new together." Gideon smiled. "Where would you want to go?" "I don't know. Somewhere with an ocean, maybe? I've never seen the ocean." "Then we'll go see the ocean next spring, I promise." Clara kissed him gently. "We're going to have a good life, aren't we?" "We're already having a good life. An even better one, then." "Yeah," Gideon agreed. "Even better." They stood there in the rose garden while the sun set and the first stars appeared, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something neither of them had believed possible. They'd been broken separately. They'd healed together. And that, Clara thought, was the real story. Not about being rescued, not about being saved from one bad situation and dropped into another, but about two people choosing each other every single day and building a life worth choosing. The roses bloomed around them, wild and fragrant and alive, and Clara finally understood what her mother had meant in that letter. She'd found someone who saw her like she mattered, And in learning to see herself through his eyes, she'd discovered something even more important. She'd always mattered. She just needed the space and safety to recognize it. Black Hollow Ridge wasn't a prison or a refuge or an escape. It was home. And Clara Vale, no longer Vernon Whitmore's daughter, no longer the scared girl in the ruined wedding dress, just Clara, was finally, truly, completely free.